I was in Manchester in 1876, and I was there to work some house. I went to a place called Whalley Range. I had spotted a house there, which I thought I could get into without much trouble. I was always respectably dressed. I made a point of dressing respectably, because I knew the police never think of suspecting one who appears in good clothes. In this way, I have thrown the police off their guard many a time. I walked through the streets of Manchester, and occasionally went between policemen, who were all the time exercising their brains. As to the burglar, who had done some houses there, on my way to the house that night, I passed 2 policemen on the road. I may tell you, I did not go to any house by accident. I always went some days, sometimes weeks, before carefully examining all the surroundings, and then having spotted a likely house, I studied the neighborhood both as to the means of getting in and as to getting away. There were some grounds about that house, and my object was to get into these grounds in the dark, and wait a convenient time for getting into the house. I missed the policemen, and for a moment I thought they had not suspected me, and had not come my way. I must have been mistaken. I walked into the grounds through the gate, and before I was able to begin to work I heard a rustling, and a step behind me. Looking back, I saw a policeman whose figure was the same as one of the 2 I passed on the road coming into the grounds. He had evidently seen me, turned back and followed. I saw I could do no work that night, and then doubled to elude him for a moment. I succeeded, and taking a favorable chance, I endeavored to make my escape as quickly as I could. I jumped on the wall, and as I was dropping down, and had cleared the premises, I almost fell into the arms of a second policeman, who must have been planted in the expectation that I would escape that way. This policeman, I did not know his name, made a grab at me. My blood was up, because I was nettled that I had been disturbed, having spotted that house for a long time and determined to do it so. I told him, "You stand back, or I'll shoot you." He didn't stand back, but came on, and I stepped back a few yards, and fired wide at him purposely to frighten him that I might get away. And now, sir, I want to tell you, and I want you to believe me, that I always made it a rule during the whole of my career, never to take life if I could avoid it. The convict said this very earnestly, and looked at Mr. Littlewood, as if he expected a further reassurance of his faith in him on that score. "Yes, sir," he repeated, "whether you believe me or not, I never wanted to take human life. I never wanted to murder anybody. I only wanted to do what I came to do and get away. But it does seem odd after all that in the end, I should have to be hanged for having taken lifeth. Very thing I always endeavored to avoid. I have never willingly or knowingly hurt a living creature. I would not even hurt an animal, much less a man. That is why I tell you, sir, that I fired wide on him." But the policeman, like most Manchester policemen, was a determined man. They are a very obstinate lot, these Manchester policemen. He was no doubt as determined as I was myself, and you know that when I am put to it, I can do that which very few men can do. After I fired wide at him, and it was all the work of a few moments, sir, I noticed that he had seized his staff, which was in his pocket, and was rushing at me, and about to strike me. I saw I had no time to lose if I wanted to get away at all that night. I then fired the second time, and I assure you again, that then I had no intention of killing him. All I wanted to do was to disable the arm which carried the staff, and in order that I might get away. But instead of that he came on to seize me, and we had a scuffle together. I could not take as careful an aim as I would have done, and the bullet missed the arm, struck him in the breast, and he fell. I know no more. I got away, which was all I wanted. Peace then rested for a little, and afterwards proceeded. I left Manchester, and went to Hull some time afterwards. I saw it announced in the papers that certain men had been taken into custody for the murder of this policeman. This greatly interested me. I always had a liking to be present at trials, as the public no doubt know by this time, and I determined to be present at this trial. I left Hull for Manchester, not telling my family where I had gone, and attended the assizes at Manchester for 2 days, and heard the youngest of the brothers. As I was told, they were sentenced to death. The sentence was afterwards commuted to penal servitude for life. Now, sir, some people will say that I was a hardened wretch for allowing an innocent man to suffer for my guilt for the crime of which I was guilty. But what man would have given himself up under such circumstances, knowing as I did that I should certainly be hanged for the crime? But now that I am going to forfeit my own life, and feel that I have nothing to gain by further secrecy, I think it is right in the sight of God and man to clear this young man, who is entirely innocent of the crime. That man was sentenced to death the day before I shot Mr. Dyson. I really did not intend to kill this policeman, but only to disable him, and then to get away myself, and I call God to witness that his life was taken by me unintentionally. I came to Sheffield the night after the trial and went to Banner Cross in the evening. There is a low wall at the back of the house, where the Dysons lived, which is one of the houses in the terrace called Banner Cross Terrace. I wanted to see Mrs. Dyson. I stood on the low wall at the back of the house. I knew the house very well, both front and back, and I knew that the bedroom was to the back. While I was standing, I noticed a light in the bedroom. The blind was up, and I could see plainly Mrs. Dyson carrying a candle and moving about the room. I watched her for some time, and I then saw that she was putting her boy to bed. I then flipped my finger sand. The convict imitated the action to Mr. Littlewood and gave a sort of subdued whistle to attract the attention of Mrs. Dyson, as I had often done before at other places. I had not long to wait. Mrs. Dyson came downstairs. She had evidently heard the signal and knew I was there, and in response to my call, she came out and passed out to the closet. I then got down off the wall into the yard and went towards the closet. I was with her there some time. You may ask what I wanted to do with her there. Well, I did not want to do what people think. I went simply for the purpose of begging her to induce her husband to withdraw the warrant which had been issued against me. I was tired of being hunted about, not being able to go and come as I liked. I only wanted the warrant withdrawn. That was my only object, and if I had got that done, I should have gone away again. Mrs. Dyson became very noisy and defiant, used fearful language and threats against me, and I got angry. Taking my revolver out of my pocket, I held it up in her face and said, "Now, you be careful what you're saying to me. You know me of old, and know what I can do. You know that I am not a man to be talked to in that way. If there is one man who will not be trifled with by you or anybody else, it is Charles Peace." She did not take warning, but continued to use threats against me, and angered me. I tried to keep as cool as I could while these loud and angry words were going on. Mr. Dyson hastily made his appearance. As soon as I saw Mr. Dyson, I immediately started down the passage which leads to the main road. I was not sharp enough. Mr. Dyson seized me before I could get past him. I told him to stand back and let me go, but he did not, and I then fired one barrel of my revolver wide at him to frighten him, expecting that he would then loose me and that I should get off. I assure you, I purposely fired wide. I was so near to him I could have shot him dead at the first shot, but I purposely fired wide, and the bullet hit the gable end of the house. Mr. Dyson kept his hold of me, struggled with me, and at last was about to get the better of me. He got hold of the arm to which I had strapped my revolver, which I always did, and I then knew I had not a moment to spare. I made a desperate effort, wrenched the arm from him, and fired again. It was a life-and-death struggle, Mr. Littlewood. But even then, I did not intend to shoot Mr. Dyson. This, you must remember, me blood was up. I had been angry at what that woman had said to me. I had only come to ask that which I thought I should get, and I would have gone away and not troubled them again. But then, with Mr. Dyson struggling with me, and having fired off one shot, I knew if I was captured, it would mean transportation for life. That made me determined to get off somehow. I fired again, as I told you, but with no intention of killing him. I saw Dyson fall. I did not know where he was hit, nor had any idea that it was such a wound as would prove fatal. All that was in my head at the time was to get away, and if he had not so obstinately prevented me, I should have got away. I assure you, sir, that I never did intend either there or anywhere else to take a man's life, but I was determined that I should not be caught at that time, as the result, knowing what I had done before, would have been worse, even than had I stayed under the warrant. After firing the first shot, I knew then how serious it was, and whatever was sworn to at the trial, I tell you that we had a scuffle, that it was a life-and-death struggle, and for a time Dyson had the best of it. With my revolver I could have shot him dead at the first, but I did not do so, and when I next fired, I could not calculate my aim owing to the excitement. If I had been able to do so, I should simply have disabled him and got away. After Dyson fell, I rushed into the middle of the road, and stood there for some moments. I hesitated as to what I should do. I felt disposed at first to go back and assist Dyson up, not thinking that he was wounded fatally, but I was laboring under great agitation. A number of people were gathering about. I heard them moving and rushing, and at last I decided to fly. I jumped over the wall on the other side of the road, and as I did so, a packet of letters fell from my pocket just as I was jumping down over the fence. It is not true that I deliberately left these letters as a plot against Mrs. Dyson. They fell from my pocket. It is not likely that I should leave any letters about to show where I had gone. I call God to witness, sir, that I did not kill Mr. Dyson intentionally, and I most solemnly swear that in shooting at him, I did not intend to murder him. Mrs. Dyson committed the grossest perjury in saying that no struggle between Dyson and myself took place. There was a fearful struggle, and she saw it. I want to be assured, Mr. Littlewood, that you really believe what I say. I tell you, that if anyone thinks he will see that I never intended murder when I went to Banner Cross. If I had meant to murder Mr. and Mrs. Dyson, or either of them, I knew the place well enough. All I had got to do was to go to the door, walk in, and shoot them both as they were sitting. And do you think, sir, if I had gone there to murder Dyson, that I should have allowed myself to be seen by so many persons? No, I would have gone about it in another way altogether. Of course, I took Mr. Dyson's life, as it turned out, but I did not go there with the intention of doing it. It was as unintentional a thing as ever was done, and it would not have been done if it had not been that I was interrupted in trying to get Mrs. Dyson to speak to her husband to withdraw that warrant, and if Mr. Dyson had not been so determined to get me into trouble, and to prevent me getting away. Now, sir, will you tell me your candid opinion of Mrs. Dyson? I know what they say, but I would like to know what you think of her. The Rev. Mr. Littlewood was not much disposed to state to the convict, as probably he would be to anyone, his candid opinion of Mrs. Dyson, but Peace insisted, and after a good deal of wavering and hesitation, Mr. Littlewood answered him. His answer, of course, has nothing to do with this story. Peace seemed slightly assured, after hearing what Mr. Littlewood had said, and a little later, after resting himself, he added, "During my life, I have never once attempted to take life willfully. I did not mean to take the life either of the Manchester policeman or of Mr. Dyson. Instead of taking life, my object has been to save life. I have fired many 100 barrels at people to frighten them, and I did succeed in frightening them, and in getting away after I had done what I came to do. Where they have lost their lives has been when they have roused me, struggled with me, and prevented me getting away, and even then, it has been in a scuffle, and never intentionally. Of course, I have used threats that I would shoot them, but that was only meant to frighten them also. My great mistake, sir, and I can see it now as my end approaches, has been this'n. All my career I have used ball cartridge. I can now see that in using ball cartridge, I did wrong. I ought to have used blank cartridge. Then I would not have taken life. If I had been captured after firing with blank cartridge in the face of anyone, I should have been able to say when I was taken that it was blank cartridge, and the worst thing that could have been done to me would only have been penal servitude. If I had to do it again, I should not use ball cartridge. Now, sir, I am very anxious that this man who was committed at Manchester should be set at liberty, for God knows that he is innocent, and in order to prove that I took that man's life, I want to tell you something. If they will take the bullet which they extracted from his body and examine it, and weigh it, they will find it was such a one as I was in the habit of using, and would fit my revolver. I shot him with the same revolver that I shot Mr. Dyson in both Dyson's and the Manchester case. One reason why fatal wounds were inflicted was, I tell you, because of the struggle, not knowing exactly what I did, or the way the bullet would go. My revolver is a peculiar one. Peace proceeded to describe technically as to its being a self-acting needle revolver, but Mr. Littlewood did not follow him so closely as to be able to reproduce his description. He gave Mr. Littlewood to understand that the revolver being self-acting, he had no control over it after the first shot. I have drawn plans, continued Peace, showing the place where the murder was done. I have furnished all the full particulars. I have remembered all this. I have done in order that I may clear this innocent man and unburden my own conscience of the crime before I go to the scaffold, when it will be too late. These plans and particulars I have handed to the governor, and he has told me that he has forwarded it to the Home Secretary. What was your object, said Mr. Littlewood, in telling me all about this murder? Well, sir, said Peace, I want you to be an additional witness to my confession that I am now making to you that I did commit it. Do you want me to take any steps in the matter to bring this man's innocence out? No, replied Peace, not necessarily, but the fact of my having given this statement to you may be of some service to the young man when I am done with. And now, sir, after my poor body is done with, I want to be entirely forgotten by everybody, and after my execution, I hope my name will never again be mentioned. I also beg that you will use your influence in Darnall, in preventing the people from persecuting the dear members of my family. They could not help anything I have done. They could not prevent it. They had not the slightest control over me in any possible way. They have no more to do with all my crimes than the greatest stranger in the land. Give my kind remembrances to the different people in Darnall, whom I new say to them, sir, that I hope they will be warned by my fate. Wish them goodbye. And tell them that Charles Peace Bad, as he is, has still the hope that all of us may meet again in heaven. I hope God will give me strength to go like a hero to the scaffold. I do not say this, sir, in any sort of bravado. I do not mean a hero, such as some persons will understand when they read this. I mean such a hero as my God might wish me to be. I feel sensible of my position. I feel penitent for all my crimes. I feel in speaking to you that one foot is on the scaffold. And I tell you, sir, before God and before men, that I am deeply grieved for all I have done. I would atone for it to the utmost of my power, and I shall endeavor to die bravely. A long pause took place. Peace seemed somewhat exhausted, and looked wearied, worn, and anxious. Mr. Littlewood then touched him upon a very delicate subject, which he had determined to broach before he left Darnall. This was on the point of disclosing the names of the receivers who had taken his goods. I want you, he said to the convict, to do me one favor. Will you grant it? I will grant it if I can, replied Peace. Well, said Mr. Littlewood, in the first place, I want you to be submissive and prepared for your great change. You say that you will do anything you can to atone to those you have wronged and to make reparation for your wasted life. I do say so, said Peace. I am most anxious to do so. Well, said Mr. Littlewood, I can't point you out a way in which you can atone in a great measure to society for what you have done. Your disclosure about the Manchester murder is an act of justice. But there is a wider act, due to society, upon whom you have preyed. It is due to society still further that you reveal the names of those who have received your stolen goods. I have no hesitation in saying that such a disclosure would be greatly to your benefit in the sight of God. You could either make it to me, or to anyone you think proper. But it is only your due to society to do it, and you have the best reason in the world for doing it. For you may attribute your present position in a great measure to those persons who have been in the habit of receiving your plunder. Mr. Littlewood proceeded. You know you would not have stolen sealskin jackets, silver plate, gold watches, diamond rings, and all those other things if you had not been able to dispose of them. They would have been really of no value to you unless you could have turned them into money. You committed a great injustice to society. And now I ask you to do an act of justice to society, and I ask you to do it as well for your own sake. Well, but you see, sir, replied Peace with great emphasis, I have always been a man, and I mean to be a man to the end. You know, sir, the public generally look on this kind of thing in the same light as you do. It is quite a mistake. I suppose you mean to say, sir, that if there were no receivers, there would be no stealers. Yes, said Mr. Littlewood, that is what I say and what I think. Well then, replied Peace, I assure you, sir, that the impression is wrong. Supposing I have taken rings containing diamonds or other brilliants, directly I have got them in my possession, I have taken the gems from the gold, and then no one can swear to them in any court of justice. I always did that quickly. I sometimes did it on the night I got possession of the plunder, and before I went to bed then, I had a crucible in which I melted down the gold and silver into small ingots and disposed of them by simple weight. No. 96. Illust Memorials of Whalley Range Murder. Memorials of the Whalley Range Murder, drawn by Peace in prison. Well, but Peace, said Mr. Littlewood, it seems to me your reply is not a sufficient reason for refusing to give up the names of the receivers of stolen property. If you would do so, it would raise you considerably in the estimation of all respectable citizens, and confer an incalculable boon upon this country. Peace made no response, and Mr. Littlewood continued. You know what you say about diamonds and gold and silver may be all true. I don't dispute with you on that point. But you could not melt down sealskin jackets and things of that kind. Peace still refused to make any response, and the subject eventually had to be dropped, as he seemed determined on the point. The reason Peace did not give the names may be stated here. His property was believed to be in the hands of receivers, and the law of felons' property is now altered. At one time, when a felon was hanged, all his property was forfeited to the crown. The law has since taken a more merciful view of the convict's family, and permits the felon to will his property as he pleases. Of course, there will no doubt be certain restrictions in the event of the property being identified as the proceeds of burglaries, but a person of peace's habits would take care that his most valuable property was promptly realized and placed where it could be obtained. It is therefore more than probable that the reason we have stated is the correct explanation that, in the event of his disclosing the names of the receivers, they would have cleared out and carried away all the booty, so that the family whom peace seems disposed to benefit at the last would have received nothing. Passing from this subject, peace said to Mr. Littlewood, "Now, sir, may I ask you a favor?" "Yes," said Mr. Littlewood, "you may. I want you, sir, to preach a special sermon over my case, but I do not want it to be preached till after my execution. I want you to hold me up to the people of Darnall, and to the world, to hold me and my career up as a beacon, that all who see may avoid my example. I want all who have known me to have me stated exactly as I am, that in the end, my death may not be altogether without service to society. You know, sir, that the public of Darnall have nothing to say against me. They will certify to this fact that I was respected by them, and they had no reason to think otherwise. I never did any of them any harm all the time I was there." Mr. Littlewood told him that he could not quite see his way to preach a special sermon about his case, particularly as he had already expressed the wish that after he was executed his name should never be mentioned, but peace held to this point. Eventually, however, Mr. Littlewood was enabled to pass on to some other subject. "Now, sir," continued Peace, "I think I have told you all I have to say, and I want, before you go, that you should do me another thing. I should like you to hear me pray." Mr. Littlewood assented, and Peace, turning to the warders, desired them to help him out of his chair, that he might kneel down by his bedside. He also commanded them to kneel down. Mr. Littlewood also knelt close to the grating. The convict then commenced a long and earnest prayer of nearly 20 minutes' duration. He prayed with great fervency and fluency. First of all, he prayed for himself, and asked God for Christ's sake to blot out all his transgressions, and implored that his sins might be washed away in the blood of Jesus, and invoked the Holy Spirit to cleanse and purify his heart. He referred to each member of his family, and prayed for them with equal earnestness. From thence, he went on to pray for those whom he had wronged, and interjected there a special prayer for Mr. Littlewood and his family, whom he hoped God would greatly bless and prosper. He then prayed for society, generally all classes of the community, and one special part of his prayer powerfully impressed his hearers. In a lower tone of voice, and with subdued earnestness, he prayed most devoutly for those two poor souls he had launched into eternity, without any warning or any time, to be prepared for their great change. He prayed that he might meet them before God, and that God would forgive him for such a wicked act, that they might meet in his presence, and he obtain full forgiveness for his crimes, and that thus meeting and recognizing each other, they might forgive and forget all that had happened on earth, and enjoy the fullness of God's presence forevermore. Before Mr. Littlewood left, Peace said, "I could like to ask you one thing, sir. Do you think it would be necessary for my own welfare that I should see Mrs. Dyson personally, and ask her forgiveness for shooting her husband?" Mr. Littlewood had understood that Mrs. Dyson had gone away, although she really did not leave till the next day, and he told the convict that Mrs. Dyson had left, adding, "What you want, Peace, above all things, is the forgiveness not of any human being but the forgiveness of your Maker, and to that, with my last words to you, I want to direct your attention." The convict looked perfectly satisfied, and asked Mr. Littlewood to engage in prayer, which he did. Mr. Littlewood's prayer was frequently interrupted by fervent responses on the part of Peace. "O God," he cried, "answer this prayer, have mercy upon me," and he cried and sobbed incessantly. Though his face was buried in the bedclothes, the sound of his sobbing was painful to hear, while his whole body quivered with emotion. The scene was most affecting, and can never be forgotten by Mr. Littlewood or the warders who were present. On rising from his knees, Mr. Littlewood asked for a Bible and prayer book, which were handed to him by the warders. Mr. Littlewood reminded Peace that the day of his execution would be Shrove Tuesday, and the day following that Ash Wednesday, the first day in Lent. He pointed out the peculiar appropriateness of various passages in the prayer book, particularly the well-known words of the communion service commencing, "Let us therefore return unto him, who is the merciful receiver of all true penitent sinners, assuring ourselves that he is ready to receive us and most willing to pardon us if we come unto him with faithful repentance, if we submit ourselves unto him." Roman 100. He also directed his attention to the introductory sentences of morning and evening prayer, the confession, and the absolution, as well as the 7 penitential psalms, the beautiful words of which might almost have been written to meet the case of a great sinner, like the condemned criminal crouching behind his prison bars. The convict seemed pleased at Mr. Littlewood's attention, and glad to have anything to occupy his mind. He asked the reverend gentleman to turn the leaves down at these passages, that he might ponder over them in his cell. As Mr. Littlewood was preparing to leave peace with tears in his eyes, said, "I suppose, sir, we shall never meet again in this world. I pray God to bless you and all your family, and I pray we may meet again in heaven." Then taking the left hand of the warder, who at the same time took Mr. Littlewood's right hand, the two parted, the visitor leaving the cell deeply affected by the interview, while the miserable being he had left was lifted wearily back into his bed, where he turned his face to the wall and wept. Chapter Roman 168, Affecting Farewell Letters. Roman 100, From Peace to his Wife and Family. Peace for a criminal was a voluminous letter writer, and after he had been sentenced to death, no restriction whatever was placed upon his writing proclivities, and he indulged them to the full when weary of writing himself. He enlisted the assistance of one of his warders who penned at his dictation. More than a week previous to his execution, Peace conceived the notion of writing a farewell letter to his wife, to each of his children and relatives, and to some of his friends, and of handing them to the chaplain when he was on the scaffold, that he might post them for him. He employed his time in writing or dictating these letters, and in a few days he had 16 completed. He then handed them to the chaplain, who posted them as requested. The following letters were addressed by Peace to his relatives. From Roman 100 Peace, H. Roman 1000 Prison Leeds, Feb 25, 1879. My dear wife, I have been a base bad man to thee for many years, O dear. If I had taken thy advice many years ago, this would not have befallen me. I need not ask for thy forgiveness, for I know that thou hast already forgiven me for all I have done to them. And my dear, I do not only forgive thee, but I forgive all persons, for I have not any ill feeling against any living person, O my dear wife. I do pray to Almighty God for thee, and I do hope that he will prosper thee in all thy doings, and bring them to the kingdom of heaven at the last, where I hope that thou wilt meet me at the last. So, O my dear lass, do not forget that our next meeting place, I hope, will be in heaven, so do not forget to prepare thyself to come. My dear wife, I do send you the copy of some verses that I made when our dear little John died, and I was at Walking Prison, Nov 26, 1871, John died. They told me gently he was dead. My dar and lovely child. They led me to the lonely grave. Where lay my darling boy? When they laid thee in the silent grave, I was a convict bound. But now I am free to meet and pray on this thy sacred ground. Great God, in pity look on me, and take my life away, and turn my body cold as clay, and lay me with my boy. But hark, methinks I hear a voice. It is my lovely child. Hark, methinks I hear him say, I am not fit to die. Thou chides me well, my once loved one, and tells me what I am. I am not to live or die. I am such a wretched man. So lay and sleep, my once loved one, and I will live and pray. So fare thee well, my darling boy. I'll meet thee in the sky. O my dear wife, how can I say good-bye to thee forever, but I must say it so. Goodbye, and may my God bless, and bring thee to heaven at the last. Goodbye, for I am gone there. Later on, Peace wrote a second letter to his wife as follows. From Charles Peace. H. Roman 1000 Prison Leeds, Tuesday, Feb. 25, 1879. To my dear wife. I think that this is a true view of how I stand in this world. In the first place, my sentence was life, and with me having been 3 in penservitu, I could not, having got my freedom any more, so that I should have to die a miserable death in prison at the end. I might have lived 20 years or more, and have died in prison at the last. So, my dear wife, I do think that me and you and my children ought to think that it will be for the best of my blessed Lord and Savior Jesus Christ will hear my prayers, and forgive me my sins, and receive my poor soul into the kingdom of heaven. So think of this, and try to meet me there, all you my dear friends. I am husband and father. Charles Peace. God bless you all. On Tuesday morning, after the convict had breakfasted, he had a few minutes to spare before being introduced to Marwood, and he employed them in writing the following letters. Last he wrote. From Leeds. H. Roman 1000, Prison Tuesday, Feb 25, 1879. O my dear wife, and famerly, I tell you this great joy that I could not tell you yesterday, for I could not I have not no fear now, for it is all dead up as to where I am going to heaven, or to the place, where the good go to that die in the Lord, to wait in the place appointed by God for the good to wait until the resurrection of the dead, go do not forget our meeting place, is, in heaven so do come at the last, and you will find me there this letter is wrote 25 minutes before I do die. So I must now say goodbye to all so goodbye, and God bless you all for I am gone to heaven. Charles Peace. To his wife, he also sent a very beautifully illuminated card in the center of a floral wreath, was the following: The Lord bless thee, and help thee the Lord make his face to shine for ever upon thee, and be gracious unto thee the Lord lift up his countenance upon thee, and give thee peace. On the back of the card, the condemned man wrote, My dear wife, this was sent to me by a lady from Hull, and as she wishes to me, I do wish to thee my dear wife, so goodbye for I am gone to heaven. Charles Peace. He also sent her a quarto copy of the old story. It was in 2 parts. 1. The story wanted. 2. The story told with the author's music. On the last page he had written, My dear wife, this was sent from London from a lady at a prayer meeting, where prayers were offered up for me at Eaton Square, London, for to bring before thy poor husband's face his Saviour, finding him a poor lost sinner, and to bring him to his fold, where I also hope thou wilt be brought. Charles Peace. Letter Roman 100, to his daughter. The following is a copy of the convict's letter to his daughter. From Charles Peace, H.M. Prison, Leeds. Tuesday, Feb 25, 1879. O my dear Jane, and my dear child, I send thee this letter from the scaffold, so O my dear child, do act up to it all through thy life, so that thou may bring thy soul to the kingdom of heaven, at the last, where I hope that thou will meet me never to part from me no more. So my dear child, do above all things in this world pray earnestly and continually to that only great and powerful God, who will bless and protect thee through life, and bring thee to heaven at the last. So my dear child, let me beg of thee not to fret for me no more than thou can help, for it will do no one any good to fret so. My dear child, the darling of my heart, I am now compelled to say to thee for ever and ever farewell, for in a few moments' time I shall be dead. So may the Lord bless thee and thy baby, and prosper you both, and bring you to the kingdom of heaven at the last. Goodbye, and God bless your father. Charles Peace. Goodbye, I am gone to heaven. To Mrs. Bolsover, he also sent a photograph representing the crucifixion, and underneath, in the same handwriting as on the other photograph, is the following: This man has done nothing amiss, he was wounded for our transgressions. On the back of the card Peace wrote, For Jane, and my dear child, this was sent from London from a lady at the prayer meeting in Eaton Square, for to bring before thy poor father's face his dying Saviour, that died to save him from his sins. And my dear child, I hope it will bring thee from thine to my dear child. Goodbye, for I am gone. Letter Roman 100, to Willie Ward. To his stepson Willie Ward Peace, sent the following letter. Those sent to his wife and daughter were in his own handwriting. The first part of the following letter was written at his dictation. From Charles Peace. H. Roman 1000, Prison, Leeds, Tuesday, Feb. 25, 1879. My dear son, I now write to you my last dying wishes, and request that you will take a warning by poor me, and live happy and comfortable with your dear mother. I have handed this to my chaplain when upon the scaffold, and a moment before I die, let me beg of you in my last moments, to give yourself to God, to try and walk in the narrow path that leadeth to eternal life. And may the great God in his mercy pardon all your sins, and may we all meet in the end at the right hand in glory. I have sincerely prayed to the great and all-powerful God to forgive me all my sins, as I freely forgive all who may have sinned against me, that those few lines may have their desired effect upon you, and that we may all meet in heaven, is the dying prayer of your dying father. My dear boy, do all that is right in the sight of God and man, and do not forget that we have fixed upon our meeting place to be heaven. So I must say goodbye, and may God bless thee, my boy. Goodbye, I am gone. To his son, he also sent a photograph of a painting representing our Saviour. As the Good Shepherd, he has a crown of thorns on his head, no shoes on his feet. In his right hand he has the shepherd's crook, and on his left shoulder he carries a lamb with which he is returning from the wilderness, to the fold. Underneath, written in capitals, Is the following the Son of Man is come to seek, and to save that which was lost. On the back of the card Peace wrote, "My dear child, this was sent from London from a lady at a prayer meeting, where prayers was offered up for me at Eaton Square, London, for to bring before thy poor father's face his Saviour, finding him a lost sinner, and to bring him to his fold, and I also hope, my son, that he will bring thee to his fold. For William Peace, goodbye, my dear son, for I am gone there." Letters to his son-in-law. The latter part of the following letter, only, is in the handwriting of the convict. From Charles Peace. H. Roman 1000 Prison Leeds, Tuesday 25th, Feb 1875. My dear son Bolsover, this is my last letter here upon earth. Let me beg of you to take my dreadful end. As a warning, may it be the cause of your leading a godly, righteous, and sober life, so that in the end, you may obtain life everlasting. It is the last advice I can ever give to you, for when you receive this I shall be dead. This is handed to the chaplain upon the scaffold, for you may it have its desired effect upon you. I wish you prosperity, may you escape all the accidents to which your profession endangers, may you live a long and happy life. And at the last, when you are put in the balance, God grant that you may not be found wanting, but that we may all meet at his right hand in glory there, to part no more, is the dying prayer of your poor father Charles Peace. So I must say goodbye, goodbye, and may God bless thee, for I am gone to heaven. Goodbye. Charles Peace. Letter from Mrs. Thompson. Tuesday, Feb 10, 1879. Dear Charlie, why is it, after all my anxiety and trouble to come to see you, after your especial desire to see me, and your letter yesterday asking me to come at once, and now you don't see me? What have I done to not merit to see you? You have turned to me in all your troubles, since I have known you. Is it because your relations have been they had the first chance, or were your feelings too much overcome? I pity you much. I sincerely thank you for your second letter you sent by the governor to read to me. I do forgive you all as you ask me, as I hope to be forgiven. I shall forever cherish the small scrap of paper torn from your long letter, which the governor so kindly gave me in Armley jail, as you blame me for all that is being done in regard to letters. And in the papers, let me tell you, I am not to blame. How could I have information that you had written to Hannah and Bolsover? You know, dearest, they are no friends of mine, and it is best known to themselves. If they were unkindly treated when they came to my house, had I have been in their position, I would not have come. But that is past. You cannot leave this world without seeing me again. You know, I have been faithful and true to you. If I have other faults now, one word, clear your conscience of everything before it is too late. Across this letter was written the following lines, said to have been Peace's own composition. And while his heart, oh, can the heart grow cold? False ones the tales that in this world are told. Swell in his voice, he knows not where to end. Like one discouraging an absent friend. On an enclosure addressed to Governor Keene, was written, please give the enclosed to my poor John. The convict, absurd as it seems, was of a poetical turn, and he was very fond of reading and reciting poetry. Indeed, he had a weakness for versification, and had in his time written many a jingling rhyme. One of his favorite compositions that he was wont to declaim began with the lines, "Lion-hearted I've lived, and when my time comes, lion-hearted ill die." When news of Peace's arrest reached the inmates of the house at 5 Evelyn Road, Peckham, the Dyson letters, so called, were given by Mrs. Thompson to Willie Ward to burn. Both Hannah Peace and the woman Thompson were in a terrible flutter, as the house contained things that would get them into trouble. Should the police search the premises, the letters entrusted to Willie Ward were, with 2 or 3 exceptions, all burned. The women, foolishly thinking their existence might tend to the incrimination of Peace. This fact was well known to the detectives. It is said the letters in question, destroyed in whosoever's handwriting they were, are stated to have contained requests for money, and their contents were not such as could have been written by a pure-minded person. The Central News special correspondent at Leeds wrote that Mrs. Thompson had again made her appearance in Leeds. She was seen at the post office. She asserted her faith that she would see Peace before he died. She again wrote to him as follows. 15th Feb 1879. To the Governor of Armley Jail. Sir, will you kindly oblige me by giving the enclosed to Charles Peace, yours Roman 100 S. Thompson. The following was the enclosure. To Charles Peace, Armley Jail, Leeds. Saturday, Feb 15, 1879. My own dear Jack, what do you mean by turning against me? I, who have cared for you, What must I believe Hannah is admitted to see you as your wife? And you have most solemnly swore to me that she was not when you, and I went to Hull you told her you would, and should marry me as I alone should be your wife, as you could not part with me. Oh, why am I to suffer like this? It is killing me. I am prevented from seeing you, and am pointed at in the streets. Here comes Mrs. Thompson. Have I deserved this? You would not have gone out, had you have taken my advice, upon the 9th of October, the date of his arrest. It is most terrible that I am not allowed to see you. All your people are doing all they can to prevent me doing so. The magistrates' committee say, I cannot unless you ask for me. John, darling, I must see you once again upon this earth. Darling, remember the last time I saw you turned back, a second time to kiss me. Oh, I do upon my knees implore of you to see me. I am watched and hunted to death. Is this not fearful? I do not imagine this time 8 months ago that I should have gained such notoriety in the world's history. John, do write me under cover to my solicitor. This is killing me. I have not a friend to whom I can turn upon earth. I cannot write more, for my heart is well nigh broken. What shall I do? God bless you. Yours, Sue. Oh, you have spoken harshly to me many times. But then when your temper has cooled down, you have come to me. John, Charlie, let me see you. I freely forgive you what you asked me in your last letter. I cannot write more. Do ask to see me, John. Your own Sue. A letter was sent by Mrs. Thompson's solicitor to the Home Secretary on 13th Feb, which, after stating the result of Mrs. Thompson's application to the Leeds justices, states certain particulars. As a reason why Mrs. Thompson should be allowed an interview with the convict, it is understood that the request had been refused by Mr. Cross. Peace and his invention. The Central News special reporter at Leeds said the convict pointedly denied that Mr. Brion ever knew or learned anything in respect of the invention for raising sunken vessels. Except what Peace imparted to him, he charged Mr. Brion with ingratitude in the matter, and said that when that individual first received a hint of the plan, he did not rest content until he had got possession of all the details of the invention. Peace's method for raising sunken ships was to close their hatchways, ports, and any large leaks, and to force air into the hold, a simple trap or valve allowing the water to escape. As the air was forced in, he purchased a small model steamer, and having taken out the engines and boilers, altered her to suit his purpose, and attached one of his valves and indie-rubber tubing, connected an air pump to the deck, a wooden tank about 7 feet long, 3 or 4 feet wide, and the same in depth was made, and this was filled with water in order to enable Peace to carry on his experiments. The model boat was also on several occasions sunk to the bottom of the Thames, and raised again by Peace's apparatus, a select party of his own, and Mr. Brion's friends being present to witness these experiments. Visit of Mr. Brion to the convict. The Central News special reporter at Leeds telegraphed on Thursday Mr. Brion, of 22 Philip Road, Peckham Rye, arrived in Leeds today about 2 o'clock. He went to the town hall, where he was at once provided with a pass, admitting him to see Peace. He immediately took a cab and drove to the jail, which he reached about 2:30 o'clock. On entering, he saw Mr. Keene, the governor, who took him to Peace's cell. The greeting between the two men was not overcordial. Mr. Brion told him the object of his visit was to get a renewal of the statement that Brion knew nothing about Peace, the convict's past career, or that he was other than what he represented himself to be, namely a retired gentleman. Peace said that such was the case, and he called those present to witness that Mr. Brion knew nothing about his doings, and the sole cause of the frequent visits to his house was in connection with the invention of raising sunken ships. Peace then asked a number of questions in respect to the Evelyn Arrowed house, and what disposition had been made of the effects. Therein Mr. Brion told him that so far as he knew, everything had been carried off and disposed of, Mrs. Thompson and Hannah having divided the proceeds. He also expressed himself as willing to turn over to anyone whom Peace should name all the plans and papers belonging to him in his possession. This appeared to please Peace, and he became more communicative. He said he was prepared to meet his fate, and that he should send letters from the scaffold to many of his relatives and friends. He professed the greatest esteem for Mr. Brion, and bade him good-bye with a considerable show of feeling, saying that the latter should hear from him again. Mr. Brion returned to London by the 10 o'clock train. Letter to Mr. Goodlad. Peace was a staunch friend as well as an implacable enemy. Two of his oldest friends were Mr. George Goodlad and Mr. Cragg, and he was much disappointed when he was informed that they could not be permitted to see him at Armley. He promised to write to them both, and he kept his word. Amongst the batch of letters handed to the chaplain on Tuesday morning was the following. From Charles Peace, H. Roman 1000 Prison, Leeds, Tuesday, 25th February 1879. My dear friend George Goodlad, I send you this letter from the scaffold. It is handed to my chaplain when upon the scaffold to send to you, so I hope you will take a warning from my most fearful fate. You and me have known each other a great number of years. You choose an honest, industrious way through life. But I choose the one of dishonesty, villainy, and sin. So my dear friend, do take a warning by me. For the remainder of your life I die with the hope that God has heard my prayers and forgiven my many sins, and that in a few moments I may be at his right hand in glory, where I hope we shall all meet at the last great day. That God may bless and prosper you and your dear wife and son, and the workmen in your shop, and all inquiring friends, is the dying prayer of yours, Charles Peace. Goodbye, and bless you all. Goodbye. Mr. George Goodlad, pianist at Milner's Concert Rooms and Picture Gallery, off West Bar, Sheffield. Peace prepares his own funeral card. At the interview that Peace had with his wife, he told her he would prepare a funeral card commemorative of his own death. He said he would endeavor to have it ready to give her when she paid the final visit to his cell. He reminded her of the monument at home made by himself, and said if she liked she might put it on that. When he came to do the card, he found that his eyesight had failed him, that his hand had somewhat forgot its cunning, and he was unable to complete it. It is the half-finished design of a tombstone, with a floral wreath across the top. In the center is the following. In memories of Charles Peace, who was executed in Armley Prison, Tuesday, Feb. 25. Age 47. For that I dawn but never intended. The lettering is in capitals and occupies about half the card. On the other half, the convict intended to have written some lines, but he was unable to do so. He gave it to his wife on Monday, with expressions of regret that he had not been able to complete it. Letter to Peace from an old convict. The following letter was sent to Peace, and by him handed over to his family on Monday. The original had the signature of the writer in full. Saturday morning, 12 past 1 o'clock. My dear friend, you will, I trust, pardon me for breaking in and intruding upon you now at this most awful and most solemn time. Most awful, because you and me are about to leave. I may, if it be the will of God, leave this earthly tabernacle off before you, this perishing world forever. Luke 21. But we must both stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Dear friend, your position is fearful here, but what will it be then? How shall we appear before the judgment seat of Christ? For I too, dear friend, have a fellow creature's life then to answer for, and it may be more than one. Me life and yours here has indeed been a life of sin and crime. Oh, that it had been otherwise, but we can do nothinger recall the past. But blessed be God, he has showed both you and me a way of escaping all bitter torments for the future. Yes, only one way. John 14 ch 6 v3 ch 14 to 18 verses. Isaiah 118:57 ch 15 v 66 ch 2 verse. Matthew 11. Psalm 146 verse. Matthew 10. Ah, my dear friend, many there are that show a cold shoulder to us. Now may God have compassion and show them mercy for Jesus Christ's sake. Yes, our friends, or most of them, in the time of trouble desert us, but there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Proverbs 18. And he that best of all friends has told me and you to call upon him in the time of trouble, and he will deliver us. I beg of you, dear friend, to listen to the chaplain. May God reward and bless his endeavors to bring you to understand your position these few remaining days. I beseech you to spend in prayer and in the reading of God's most holy word. I have indeed found very great comfort by reading that sacred volume, after asking our Heavenly Father's forgiveness of the past and to open my eyes to the blessed truths contained therein. And I have found in times past in a prison cell that peace which the world cannot give. It 25 years of my past life have I spent in prison, but to be with you now, dear friend, I would very gladly spend 5 years more. Shall I tell you why, dear friend? Because you and me are by ourselves lost, but Jesus Christ says, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. Only trust him, he will save you. Have faith in God. May the Almighty and merciful God forgive all our sins and grant you and me a place in his kingdom at the right hand of Jesus Christ, our only mediator and advocate, is the earnest prayer of your friend W.O. Mile End Road, London. Farewell, dear friend. I do so much want to meet you in heaven. Do come. Mercy's door is open for us, and God's hand is stretched out still. From a little girl. The following is a copy of another letter sent to Peace, and on it he wrote, "This was sent to me by a little girl. Jesus Christ says he came to seek, and to save that which was lost. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. When he was dying he prayed for those who killed him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And now Jesus, our Lord, is in heaven praying to God for you. He died on the cross for you, because he loves you, and wills not the death of a sinner, but rather that all should come unto him and have everlasting life. Oh, don't think you are too great a sinner for Jesus to save. He is ready and willing to save to the uttermost all who come to him. He is longing for you now to believe in him, and be safe forever. He has promised him, that cometh unto me, I will in no wise cast out. And all you have to do is to repent, and ask God to forgive your sins for Christ's sake. We have no need of doing that. We have all sinned, and grieved our loving Savior many times. Then think of what follows after this life, everlasting bliss and happiness with Jesus. But if you refuse to come and be washed in the blood of the Lamb, it is awful to think of what follows: in everlasting pain in hell, with devils and damned spirits, where the worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched. Oh, don't let such an awful fate be yours. You can prevent it, if you will, when Jesus is ready now, this minute, to save you. Why do you delay? What keeps you back? A man in the Bible wanted to be saved, but he did not know how to say a long prayer, so he just said, "Lord, have mercy upon me." And God heard him, and answered his prayer. Oh, may God help you, and may you be able to really believe that Jesus loves you, and is waiting to save you. We will all pray for you, that for our Savior's sake you may be saved, and we shall then meet you in heaven with Jesus. February 10th, 1879. Telegram from Ireland. On the 22nd inst., the convict received the following telegram from Roman 1000 J. Londonderry to Charles Peace, Armley Prison, Leeds. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. He is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him. When the telegram was handed to Peace, he read it, and said, "This is from Kate Dyson's sister. Her initials are Roman 1000 J, and ill be bound. She has sent it." The message seemed to give him a good deal of pleasure, but the impression is that he was wrong as to where it came from. Chapter Roman 169 Sketch of the convict's career. The life of the hero of this work was, as already indicated, full of strange incidents, which have been duly chronicled during the progress of this history. We subjoin a brief epitome of his career. His father, who started in business as a shoemaker after a wandering life spent at fairs and wakes, was residing in Nursery Street, Sheffield, on the 14th of May 1832, the day when Charles Peace was born. The lad was sent to school in the town, but did not make much progress, and revealed a strong taste for constructing various articles rather than for learning. On leaving school, he went to work at a rolling mill, and was there crippled in the leg by a piece of heated steel in 1853. When a young man, he had gained great proficiency as a performer on the violin, and in company with a number of amateur theatricals, appeared at worship as the modern Paganini. At this time, notwithstanding his lameness, he excelled in physical exercises, and was so courageous that he once seized an enraged bulldog and beat it until the animal was stunned. His first robbery was committed at Mount View in Sheffield, and for that offense he was sent to jail for a month. On his liberation, he began to associate with thieves, and soon became notorious as a portico robber. In 1854, he broke into 3 gentlemen's residences at Sheffield, gaining admittance by climbing the portico, and carried off large quantities of jewelry. Caught again, he was tried and sentenced to 4 years' penal servitude. Having served that term, he resumed his old life of fiddling and thieving, and in the course of his strolling met Hannah Ward, whom he is alleged to have married. Soon after his marriage, he went to Manchester, and whilst committing a burglary at Rusholme on the 11th of August 1859, was captured after a desperate resistance, and again sentenced to penal servitude, this time to 6 years. In the summer of 1864, however, he was again free, and commenced business in Sheffield. But it did not flourish, and he returned to Manchester, where he got into trouble about another burglary, and was sent into penal servitude for a further term of 10 years. In prison, he was mixed up in a mutiny, flogged, and then sent to Gibraltar, but his sentence was commuted to 6 years. And on the 9th of August 1872, he returned once more to Sheffield, where for some time he worked industriously as a picture framer, and lived apparently a most exemplary life, sending his children to the Sunday school. About this time, his hand was injured by a pistol shot, one of his fingers being blown off, but the injury did not materially interfere with his business, which he continued on his removal to Darnall. Whilst living in Brittany Road there, he met the Dysons, forced himself upon their society, pried into their affairs, and made himself so objectionable that Mr. Dyson wrote on one of his visiting cards, "Charles Peace is requested not to interfere with my family," and threw it into Peace's garden. Peace was furious. He sought out Mr. Dyson, tried to trip him up by the heels, and the same night, confronting Mrs. Dyson, revolver in hand, threatened to blow out her brains, and her husband's too. A warrant was taken out against him. He escaped to Hull, but returned to Sheffield again on the 25th of October 1876, when he threatened to annoy Mrs. Dyson wherever she went. On that day, the Dysons had removed from Darnall to Banner Cross specially to escape his disagreeable visits, but Peace followed them there, and meeting Mr. Dyson near his new abode, took out his revolver with the intention of shooting him at that time if Mr. Dyson had offered to molest him. Peace returned to Hull and turned his wife and family out of doors because his daughter ventured to bring up the name of Mrs. Dyson in conversation. He then wandered to Manchester and back again to Sheffield, where on the night of the 28th of November 1876, he alleges that he had another interview with Mrs. Dyson. The next morning, the 29th, he visited his mother, and later in the day, had an interview with the Rev. E. Newman at Ecclesall Vicarage, to whom he told a most extraordinary story of his wrongs, and accused the Dysons of destroying his home happiness. The same night, shortly after 8 o'clock, Peace shot Mr. Dyson. He concealed himself in the yard behind the house at Banner Cross, and watched Mrs. Dyson go into a closet. When she opened the door, he stood before her with a revolver in his hand, and said, "Speak, or ill fire." The woman, greatly terrified, gave a loud shriek, and stepping back into the closet, slammed the door, which she closed. Mr. Dyson immediately came out of the house, and Mrs. Dyson, hearing his footsteps, left the closet, and saw her husband follow Peace across the passage. Suddenly, she saw the man turn and fire at her husband. Mr. Dyson, a powerful man 6 feet 6 inches in height, was undeterred by the shot and still pursued Peace, who, on reaching the steps at the end of the passage, again faced round, fired his revolver, and Mr. Dyson fell shot in the left temple, the bullet penetrating to the brain. "Murder, you villain, you have shot my husband," shouted Mrs. Dyson, who was found by the neighbors supporting her husband's head. Peace escaped across the fields, and Mr. Dyson died 2 hours afterwards, although not certain as to the result of his firing. Peace felt it necessary to get out of the way as soon as possible, and cutting across the country, he arrived at another suburb of the town. In the meantime, he slipped an india-rubber band over his head, confining his long white beard closely under his chin, and putting on a muffler, gave himself the appearance of a man with a short beard. Taking a cab, he rode into the center of the town, and after bidding goodbye to his mother and a brother, he walked to a Turcliffe Road station, and went to Rotherham from another station. He went on to York the same evening, and a day or two afterwards turned up at Hull, where his wife was keeping an eating-house. No sooner had he entered than the detectives came up to inquire for him. He hastily ran upstairs, and getting out of a bedroom window, climbed up a spout and got upon the roof. When the coast was clear, he returned and had dinner, but was again forced to fly to the roof by another visit from the detectives. He escaped at dark, and then assumed that disguise, which first deceived his relatives, and subsequently enabled him to elude the vigilance of some of the cleverest detectives in the country. Finding the police were on his track, he left Hull in a roundabout way, and wandered about the country for nearly 6 weeks. Once, he traveled with a police sergeant, and fraternized with him in the train. On another occasion, he ostentatiously read to a police officer the bill offering a reward of 100 for his capture. Early in January, he turned up at Nottingham, and taking lodgings in a low quarter of the town, he commenced burglarious operations. It was here that he formed the acquaintance of Mrs. Thompson, and after living with her for a short time in Nottingham, they went to Hull and lodged in the house of a police sergeant. Whilst in Hull, Peace made considerable stir, and on 2 occasions was very nearly caught. His first work was on a Saturday night. He had broken into a villa residence, and collected a number of articles of value when the front door opened, and 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen entered. He hastened to the first landing, and found to his surprise that the people were coming upstairs. he took energetic measures. Drawing his revolver, he fired over the balustrade into the ceiling, and the people, frightened out of their wits, fell downstairs. And Peace escaped through the garden. One of the gentlemen pursued him, but was fired at by Peace, who got safely away. On another occasion, Peace was stopped by a policeman. As he was leaving a house with some booty, the constable asked Peace what he was doing there. And Peace immediately fired at him. The officer fled precipitately. And Peace again got away shortly afterwards, finding a constable drunk on his beat. Peace entered 6 houses in one row, and finished a successful season by a large robbery of plate at the house of Mr. Ansell, a member of the town council. Returning to Nottingham, he committed several daring robberies, the last of which was a most successful silk robbery, and for the detection of the thief, in which case, a reward of 50 was offered. The police got a clue, and going to the place where he was staying, found Peace and Mrs. Thompson in bed. Peace told the officer that he was a hawker, and offered to show him his license if he would go downstairs. No sooner, however, had the officer left the room than Peace escaped through the window, and subsequently went back with Mrs. Thompson to Hull. Peace next moved to London, and took a miserable room in Stangate Street, Lambeth. Here, he was ostensibly carrying on the business of a dealer in musical instruments. But it was at this period that his most successful burglaries were committed. Breaking into a villa at Denmarkhill, he found a large safe in one of the lower rooms, but not being an expert at opening safes, he went upstairs into the master's bedroom and took his keys out of his trousers pockets as they lay on the bed. He took from the safe all the family plate, and obtained for it in Petticoat Lane no less than 250. Soon afterwards, he realized 200 by a burglary at Southampton. The greater part of this was in money, and the remainder in Bank of England notes. Subsequently, he removed to Greenwich, and brought Hannah Peace, his reputed wife, and her son Willie Ward to live with him. Hannah Peace and Mrs. Thompson soon quarreled, and the family removed to Peckham, where they lived in good style at No. 5 Evelyn Road. This was a pretty little villa, standing in its own grounds. There were 2 entrances to the premises, a small gateway leading to the front steps, and a carriage entrance. The front door opened into a moderate-sized hall, and a large drawing room communicated by means of folding doors with a spacious sitting room behind. The house was well furnished throughout, and indeed at the time that Peace took it, he must have been possessed of a considerable amount of ready money. In the drawing room were a number of knickknacks, and in the different rooms there were several good pianos and violins. Peace made a number of improvements to the outside of the house, and the Thompsons came to be regarded by the residents as their carriage neighbors. Here Peace set up a pony and trap, and in the afternoon, he used to ride out and mark the houses which he thought likely for business. At night, he would go out and enter the houses, and the pony and trap, which was waiting for him somewhere in the neighborhood, was driven home at a most furious pace, the proceeds of the burglaries being concealed in the cart. It is believed that here he did some good business, but in spite of the fact that he had 2 women and a young man living with him, very little is known of his actual operations. He had some trouble with the women. Mrs. Thompson drank, and Mrs. Peace was jealous, but Peace had no fear of treachery, and he continued most successfully his burglarious career. He received regular visits from the receiver of stolen goods, who used to take back good bargains from Evelyn Road. At one time Peace endeavored to melt down the plate he obtained to render its disposal more easy, but this attempt he soon gave up as likely to attract the attention of the neighbors. Thus he lived until the 10th October last year, when he was so pluckily captured by Police Constable Robinson. The officer detected him in a burglary in the house of Mr. Burness, at St. John's Park, Blackheath, and calling the assistance of 2 other officers, a most determined and prompt effort was made to capture the man who had terrified South-East London by his nocturnal robberies, and brought down a storm of reprobation upon the police. No. 97. Illustration. Peace after his interview. Peace after his interview with the Rev. Mr. Littlewood. Robinson saw him leaving the house and chased him across the garden. Peace drew a revolver and fired 5 times, the last shot wounding the officer severely in the elbow, but Robinson stuck to his man, and the other officers coming, he was secured. The news of his arrest soon reached his people in Evelyn Road, and the house was stripped of almost everything. In a few days furniture was sold, and the proceeds of burglaries were removed to Nottingham and Sheffield. Then Mrs. Thompson, under pressure, informed the police who their prisoner really was, And whilst the London officers were congratulating themselves on having caught a most successful burglar, the Sheffield police were equally satisfied that the Banner Cross murderer was in custody. An officer was dispatched to America to find Mrs. Dyson, the widow of the murdered man, and before he returned Peace under the alias of John Ward, had been sentenced to penal servitude for life for the attack on Robinson. No time was lost in bringing Peace to trial for the graver offense, and on the 17th January, he was taken to Sheffield for his preliminary examination. He was remanded on this occasion, and he was being taken from Pentonville to Sheffield on the following Wednesday when he made that daring attempt to escape, or to commit suicide. He was being conveyed to Sheffield under the charge of 2 warders, and whilst the train was running at the rate of 50 miles an hour between Ritford and Sheffield, Peace suddenly jumped out of the window. One of the warders dashed forward and seized him by one foot. As he almost flew through the window, he thus had but insecure hold of the convict, who appeared to be almost mad with rage that his attempt had been foiled, and struggled wildly to escape from the officer's grasp. With his left leg, he savagely kicked the officer's hands, and with his manacled hands grasped the footboard and endeavored to free his right foot. The other warder, in the meantime, was unable to get to the window, and Peace's boot coming off, he fell on the footboard of the carriage with his head, and bounded off that into the up line. The train was stopped after running about a mile, and Peace was found lying insensible. Where he fell, he had received a severe wound at the back of the head, and was so much shaken that he could not be brought before the magistrates that day, and was remanded. On the following day, a note was found upon him containing the words, "Bury me at Darnall, God bless you all, Roman 100 Peace." This, he said, he wrote in Pentonville, because finding that he could not escape, he had determined to commit suicide. He was sent for trial at the Leeds Assizes, and was then sentenced to death after trial before Mr. Justice Lopes. After his removal to the condemned cell, he had paid great attention to the administrations of the chaplain, and was described as having been really penitent and resigned to his fate. He also carried on a voluminous correspondence, letters frequently passing between him and his family and Mrs. Thompson. The latter, after having handed him over to justice, most persistently sought an interview with him, but was not allowed by the authorities to see him. One of the most extraordinary events in connection with Peace's career was his confession of the Whalley Range murder. A young man named Habron was then undergoing penal servitude for the crime which Peace stated he himself committed. The murder occurred on the 1st of August, 1876. It was at the time when Peace had the Sheffield warrant hanging over him. He had packed up his housebreaking implements and left Sheffield for Hull and Manchester in July. Arriving in Manchester, he committed several burglaries, and on the night of the 1st of August, he went to the house of Mr. Gatrix at West Point, Whalley Range, to break into it. As he was going towards the house, he was seen by Mr. Simpson, a law student, and police constables Cock and Beanland. Peace, followed by Beanland, crossed the grounds, and jumping over a wall into the street, alighted close against police constable Cock, who was watching there. The officer tried to arrest him, and Peace fired to frighten him, but Cock endeavored to apprehend him. Peace then shot the constable in the chest, and escaped before the arrival of Beanland, who remained in the grounds seeking the burglar. 3 brothers named Habron, who were employed at a market gardener's near, were suspected of the murder, and 2 of them, John and William, were committed for trial. At the assizes, which took place on the 27th and 28th of Nov, William Habron was found guilty and sentenced to death, but John was acquitted. A petition was got up on behalf of William Habron, and his sentence was commuted to penal servitude for life. Not long afterwards, Peace, under a pledge of secrecy, told his relatives what he had done, and expressed a wish that he could get the young man liberated without implicating himself. A few days after he had been sentenced to death at Leeds for the murder of Mr. Dyson, he drew plans showing the locality at West Point, Whalley Range, indicated the spot where the murder was committed, and also wrote a confession of the crime. His plans and confession were forwarded to the Home Office. Peace had a final interview with his brother Daniel and various other relatives on Saturday. Though physically prostrate and suffering much from emotion, the convict expressed himself as prepared to meet his fate and earnestly enjoined his friends to lead religious and virtuous lives. As a supplement to the above, we add the following details of Peace's early crimes. Having recovered from the 2 years' illness caused by his accident at Kelham Rolling Mills, He had been in the service of Mr. Edward Smith, and had after that become under the tuition of one Bethley, a player on the violin at public houses. There is a tradition that soon after this, having had a quarrel with his sister, he slept out in an empty house, was caught, and got a month's imprisonment therefor. Whether this be so or not, the next glimpse we get of him is making a highly promising commencement in his future profession. He was charged at the Sheffield Sessions on Saturday, Dec. 13, 1851, along with George Campbell, with breaking into the house of Mrs. Catherine Ward, Mount View, the mother of the then Mayor of Sheffield, and stealing 2 pistols, a mahogany box of bullet mold, and other articles. An entrance had apparently been effected by climbing upon the balcony and opening the bedroom window. The only property missing was a case containing Mrs. Ward's jewels, a case containing a brace of rifle pistols, and a silk dress. The prisoners were afterwards found dealing with the pistols. Campbell was discharged, while Peace, who received a good character for honesty from his late employer, got 1 month's imprisonment. This robbery shows how closely Peace adhered to the modus operandi adopted thus early, and it fixes his then aged 19. A crop of burglaries in 1854, 4 years penal servitude. During the subsequent years, 185,234, he was continuing his musical services at public houses, and becoming familiar with company no better than it should be. In the autumn of 1854, he was carrying on a daring game of house robbery, and from a report in the papers, it appeared that on the 13th of October 1854, Charles Peace, Mary Ann Neal, his sister, and Emma James were placed in the dock of the town hall to answer several charges of felony. James had offered a pair of boots in pledge at the shop of Messrs. Wright Westbar, and on her being detained on suspicion, Peace came forward and claimed the boots, and was given into custody. In Peace's mother's house in Bailifield, there was found a large quantity of jewelry and wearing apparel, including crepe shawls, silk dresses, Roman 100. The proceeds of robberies effected at the residences of H. E. Hoole S. Crooks, Moore House, R. Stewart S. Brinkliff, Edge, Mr. G. F. Platt Priory, Villa Sherolane, and Mr. Brown, Broomhill Street. The houses of all these parties had been robbed by effecting an entrance through the bedroom windows in the evening, before the windows were closed and fastened for the night. At Mr. Hoole's, the thief had climbed the portico, and from Mr. Stewart's, a good deal of jewelry had been stolen. The prisoners were clearly proved to have been in possession of this property. The defense raised does not place in a very amiable light the affection subsisting between the sister and that brother, who used to avenge the wrongs she sustained at her husband's hands. Each accused the other of being the culprit. At the sessions at Doncaster, October 20, 1854, Peace, who was undefended, said that a watchmaker named Bethley in Division Street had kept his sister Neal for some years, and she had had 3 children by him. Bethley, not having given her any money lately, sent the jewelry and a bundle of wearing apparel by him to her instead of money. Peace was sentenced to 4 years penal servitude, and the female prisoners each to 6 months' imprisonment. Peace was described in the calendar at that time as being 22 years of age. The mention of Bethley's name will remind our readers that he was the person who instructed Peace in the art of violin playing, and Mrs. Neal's connection with the case does not shed much luster on the family annals. She died, we may add by way of completing her history, on the 2nd April 1859, age 33. Chapter Roman 170 Pieces, Extraordinary Career. There is an old Yorkshire saying, when it is dangerous to speak the truth, it is wisdom to say nothing, and that would appear to have been the motto which Charles Peace adopted during the last 4 or 5 years of his life. We are enabled to continue the narrative, not for the guidance of any who may read it, but as a warning. The fact that Peace has now to answer the capital charge is of itself sufficient evidence of the gradations downwards which the pursuit of crime involves. The singular episodes in the career of the criminal are stranger even than many a highly imaginative novelist could have portrayed. The police have been acquainted with many of them for months, and have been puzzled by them. The narratives are obtained from a private source of a perfectly reliable character, and are given accordingly. In the course of recent inquiries, allusion has been made to certain letters, which were addressed to Mrs. Dyson by the prisoner. These letters had upon them the Hamburg postmark, showing they had been posted there. From that it was argued that Peace had been living in that town, but the man never left the country excepting on Suhans sent to Gibraltar. He gave the letters to a captain to post in Hamburg, and his instructions were faithfully carried out. That piece had committed a great number of burglaries and impudent feats of housebreaking, there can be no doubt, but his most daring ones have certainly been completed in the metropolis, and during recent years. 3/4 of the thefts which he has committed in this way have been between 6 and 8 o'clock in the evening, and but very few of them after midnight. Now that he has been found out to have been the sole perpetrator of some of the robberies referenced to the police books, proves the statement as to the hours when these were done to be correct. One night Peace repaired to a house in Greenwich, his object being to borrow some jewelry which he knew to be in one of the bedrooms. It was the dwelling of a rich man. And when he reached the second-story window at the back, he, for the first time in his life, became acquainted with the use of a patent window fastener. When he had raised the sash about 2 inches, he found it was prevented from going any further upwards by 2 brass knobs which protruded from the woodwork. In addition to that, there was another apparatus which prevented him from moving the sash back. Again, it was locked. He was very much annoyed with this contrivance, but being of a resolute turn of mind, he repaired to the same house in a night or 2 afterwards, and took another course, certainly an extraordinarily bold one. He took the window frames out bodily in the same manner, as is often done for the removal of furniture in and out of the houses, and entered the house. That way the booty he secured on that occasion was exceedingly valuable. There is no doubt that Peace was well prepared for anyone should they endeavor to effect his capture, and there can be no more ample proof of this than the reception he gave Police Constable Robinson. It is believed, however, that had he known there were other members of the police force about besides Robinson, the latter would have had a sorry time of it. Whatever is stated to the contrary, Peace was undoubtedly a dead shot. When he meant it, he has fired over the heads of many people who have disturbed him in his operations. On one occasion in London, he broken into a gentleman's house and had gathered together a number of valuables. This was when the family were at dinner below. To his chagrin, a lackey entered the room, stared at him for a moment, and then, as if divining his purpose, bolted down the stairs. Peace got through the window by which he had entered, passed to the roof of an outbuilding, and dropped into the backyard. But the footman, for he was no other, had given the alarm to his master, and the latter, with presence of mind, had run to the kennel and unchained a large mastiff dog. The animal at once dashed towards Peace, but was shot dead on the spot by the intruder, the bullet entering its forehead, and the gentleman and his servant retreated indoors. On another occasion, lights were observed through the upper windows of a house by the police on beat, who suspected that a burglar was at work in the upper rooms. The officers made their dispositions, and were confident that they had the depredator completely boxed, but the officers had reckoned without their host. It was not a burglar of the ordinary stamp with whom they had to deal, but one who had gone through nearly every phase of life, which it is possible for one who follows the profession to experience. An alarm was raised, when luckily for Peace it proved that the occupants of the house were an old man and woman, and the servant. He took good care they did not see him, but quickly made his way into the garret. The constables were admitted after some little demur, and a thorough search took place, but no intruder could be found. Still, there was the fact that strange lights had been seen in the place, and the kitchen window had been broken open. One of the constables, however, raised the garret window, and on looking through saw a man sitting on the slates. He seemed determined to follow, and commenced to do so, but he found that he had no foothold, for the roof was of pantiles. Peace had slipped off his boots and left them on the roof. In great haste, he scrambled away. His left foot came in contact with one of the broken tiles, and he cut it exceedingly severely. He got on some outbuilding, dropped into a garden, and escaped. He did not recover from his injuries, however, for some weeks after. On 2 separate occasions, after the murder, Peace was within a few yards of the clutches of the Hull detectives, when they were actually in search of him. He had taken up his temporary quarters in a house there, and they must have suspected that he was lurking somewhere about it, for one day 2 detectives entered. He was in the back kitchen, so he quietly went upstairs and into the garret. The lower rooms were looked into, and also the bedrooms, but there were no suspicious appearances, and the search was not proceeded. On that occasion Peace was interrupted, whilst in the enjoyment of a basin of soup. Shortly after that the detectives again visited the same place, for they still thought they might find some clue to him in the town which he had previously lived in. When they entered the front door, Peace was again in the kitchen, half stripped, washing himself at the sink. He had scarcely time to reach the top of the stairs before they were at the bottom of them, and he made straight for the garret, this time to the roof also. He must have considered himself hardly pressed, for after going along the slates, he got into another house through the window, and explained his presence in that condition to the wondering woman who occupied the house, by representing that the police were after him, because he had deserted his family. He said that he had only done it a week or so before through necessity, but had now got work, and intended to fetch his wife and the little ones. He was then allowed to remain in the house for the rest of the day. For this took place at noon. The detectives once more retired after a fruitless search, and without the slightest knowledge that they had been so near to the one they wanted that night. Had they apprehended a person who was dressed in female clothing, and who booked from Hull to Manchester, they would have caught Charles Peace, for it was disguised in this way that he effected his escape on that occasion from the From thence he went to Manchester, and afterwards to Nottingham. He was fruitful in his resources whenever danger was pressing, and it will be seen as cunning as he possibly could be. He had nerve, however, and a run of good luck in almost all his proceedings. There was no doubt that the police were on a good track when they watched Hull closely, and though it may seem easy to say they might have seen, when the secret is known, they were not aware that they had nearly had the one they sought securely in their hand. Peace's captor. The proposed testimonial to Police Constable Robinson, the officer who captured Peace, prospered very satisfactorily. Subscriptions were received at the Royal Hotel, Haymarket, the Star, High Street, the Exchange Street, the Elephant, Norfolk Street, Bull's Head, Sheffield Moor, Old Star Vaults, Old Haymarket, Royal Hotel, Highfield, Little Angel, Westbar, Hen and Chickens, Castlegrean, Queen Sheaf Street. Mr. George Dawson, a local phrenologist, sent the following letter. Those who have or have not had the satisfaction to see Charles Peace are naturally desirous of seeing the man who was chiefly instrumental in capturing the great rascal, and who had so narrow an escape from being murdered by him. As many have asked me if I had seen him, the following brief sketch may be interesting. Mr. Robinson is a good-looking, quiet, pleasant, genial fellow, not unlike the Prince of Wales's. His type of features: he is rather florid with light brown hair and beard. He is very finely developed, physically plump and muscular, with sufficient of adipose tissue to make him round in form and easy in manner. The bony and fibrous systems are less high in him than the vital and muscular. He is about 39 or 40, in round the chest 5 ft 712. In high, he looks only a little man. But I am told he weighs 13 stone. He has a small head measuring 2112 about, and his brain is mostly developed in the practical and observing, and the moral faculties. He is quite firm and independent, but lacks self-esteem, has no desire or ability to show off. He's very retiring. He is steady, cool, and rather harmonious, but has only moderate destructiveness and combativeness. Hence he is mild, kindly, and genial, the naughty and quarrelsome points being weak. He would hurt even a burglar only in self-defense. He is in almost every respect bodily and mentally very opposite of Peace, though this is not the time to give a phrenological description of that gentleman. Sheffielders are pleased with the captor of their chief ruffian, and he is pleased with the hardiness and kindliness of Sheffielders. Extraordinary communications. Running away from Banner Cross on the night of the murder, Peace accidentally or intentionally dropped a small bundle of notes and letters. These were mentioned in the court of the proceedings at the trial, and they formed the subject of much of Mr. Clegg's cross-examination. In court it is contended by Peace that they were written to him by Mrs. Dyson. Mrs. Dyson, however, swears positively that they were not written by her, and that she never saw them until they were shown to her some time after they were found. The theory of the prosecution was that the whole of the notes and letters were written by Peace for his own purpose. What those purposes were, of course, can only be imagined. It may have been to get Mrs. Dyson into his power. The notes were of an extraordinary character. Most of them were written in pencil on scraps of paper. As doubtless this correspondence will be read with considerable interest, we give it in its entirety, following the spelling and other eccentricities of the writer. Things are very bad, for Pepple told him everything, so the say you cat pick out for Roman 500. Do keep quiet, and don't let anyone see you money. Send me some. Send me a drink, I am nearly dead. Be quick you, he is out now. He is out now, so be quick Fanny, as let us have a look at you. Will you send me a shilling or two and a drope, and keep very quiet, be quick. Give it to me up in the garret, but don't talk for fear, he is not going only, his sister is coming, love to all. I will write you a note when I can, perhaps tomorrow, you can give me something as a present if you like, but I don't want to be covetous, and take them from your wife and daughter. Mrs. Norton is raising hell about what I could you settle it, and send me a print that is I have and her to let me have a pint. He is gone out, come now, for I must have a drink. After he is going out, I won't go if I can help it, so see for Janie. I have just run out of writing paper, excuse the envelope. Many thanks for my book, don't mind framing the picture, let them have it without, as I have nothing to say in the matter. I will thank your wife as soon as I get a chance to see her for her kind present, tell her so with my love. I was very sorry to hear your quarreling, hope it is all settled no, and having to hear the readings you should be quiet, you have a good wife, be kind to her. This was written yesterday, but could not see you. He won't say when he is going, not today, anyhow he is not very well. I will write you when I have a chance, and put you in the work. He only went for tobacco, and he has not been out. I shall tell you, when he does you must not say I am doctor, when I am not, for I don't thank you for you form that opinion. I shall go to Ireland, if you don't be I am washing today, so he won't be out, perhaps get me paper, love. If you have a note for me send now, while he is out, but you must not venture for he is watching, and you can't be too careful, hope your foot is better. He went to Sheffy yesterday, but I could not see you anywhere, were you out, love to ya? Have you got your handkerchief? I lost mine, pocket hank and gloves, thanks for this money, must be careful, and not show anything or I will let you starve. I think I will go by 9 o'clock, now you must not go by train, go by tram, because he will go down with me, don't let him see anything, meet me in the wicker, hope nothing will turn up to prevent it, love to Janie. If you are not at home, Janie will give you this, do be careful, you will get yourself into trouble about the empty house. Don't come until I tell you there is a man over the wall says he will give you hell now. I tell you this as a friend, so as you may be on the lookout for your families. How well you never told that man, I looked at you out of the window, you left me to find out for myself, and would not put me on my guard, as I do you hope you won't omit again, don't talk to Willie much. Or give him any half-pegs, don't be a fool, it looks as if you want people to know the way you, and if you are not more careful, we will have to say quits. I have told you not to say anything until Saturday afternoon. I write you these few lines to thank you for all your kindness, which I shall never forget, from you and your wife. She is a very good one. Does she know you are to give me the things, or not? How can you keep them concealed? One thing I would wish you to do is to frame his mother's photo and send it in with my music book, if you please do it when he is in. Many thanks for your kind advice. I hope I shall benefit by it. I shall try to do right by everyone if I can, and shall always look on you as a friend. Goodbye. I have not much time. Burn this when you read it. Dear sir, are you at home or not? For I can't see you. I looked for you yesterday when I went to Sheffield, but could not see you, and don't like to send if you are not in, because I know Janie have not seen you all day. But he has not been out. You are getting very with old Ned. Don't blab anything to him, for it will be all over. Never speak of me. I will not send this till I know you are at home. Hope you are well, and don't fret, but I will give you the wink when the coast is clear. But you must not take notice till I tell you, or you will make a mess of it, because he is always on the lookout. Don't know when he will go out again, but will sure tell you. Love to GB. Burn this. Other murders by Peace. The Sheffield Telegraph stated Peace has committed many murders. He has done more than 2, yes, many. Such were the words which fell from the lips of one who was placed in close communication with the convict, and who occupies a position which entitles his utterance to the fullest credence. We may go further and say that there is ample testimony that Peace has indeed pursued a career even more bloodstained than has yet been made known to the public, and that could he have been prevailed upon to state the whole of the fouler crimes that he has committed there, would indeed be a category so revolting that the community would scarcely believe such outrages could have been perpetrated, and the chief actor in them have escaped so long. He has not alone taken human life in order to escape arrest, but he has taken it that he might effect robbery. Peace had accomplices in these deeds. There are those living who know not only of their execution, but also of the planning of them, and have had a hand in the foul transaction. A statement like the foregoing is startling, but we have good grounds for saying that subsequent events will prove the truthfulness of them. It is also stated on high authority that more than one person is in prison, suffering for the misdeeds of this man. We announced on the 11th instant that Peace had told his family on the previous day that one young man had already served 7 years in penal servitude, having been respited after being condemned to death for willful murder. We are told that Peace still holds to the statement and says he will give such evidence as will clear the man. He gives further a strong intimation that he himself did the deed. The murder was committed at the close of 1871 or in 1872. We are also informed that on one occasion Peace premeditated a jewelry robbery in Chelsea and that in order to carry it out, he associated himself with a female paramour who obeyed his instructions. This woman of set purpose sought the friendship of the jeweler and became intimate with him, and on the night of the burglary assisted the chief actor in it. The jeweler offered a resistance and was murdered. No person ever being convicted of the crime, the authorities are already using every means at their disposal for the discovery of Peace's principal movements during the past 3 years, and the recovery of some of the property stolen might lead to results of enormous consequence. As affecting this revelation, there is now proof in hand that it was not with the bullet alone that Peace sent some of his victims on their last journey. It will be remembered that when he was finally captured, a large knife was found in his possession, but on that occasion, he never had the opportunity of using it. However, information has been given that on another occasion, whilst he was engaged in committing a robbery, he was surprised by a man when he drew a knife from the pocket where he always kept it and stabbed his would captor. After that, he gave the poor fellow a heavy downward blow with the weapon and inflicted a wound from which the bowels protruded, and which ultimately caused the death of the victim. We have ground for stating also that more than one of his victims has been thrown into the Thames, although the murders have not taken place on its banks if near to them. The convict has made use of certain expressions which leave no doubt that the worst part of his criminal career dates more than 10 years back, probably 15. And though he is reticent on this point, it is believed that one of the greatest reasons for his disquietude of mind is the knowledge that more than one has suffered innocently because of his misdeeds. He has yet to state, should he carry out the intentions he has expressed, whether or not anyone has suffered on the gallows for murder done by him, and from the peculiar manner in which he has dealt with this subject, it is feared that such is the case. It is thought also that the convict will throw some light on several tragedies in which he had not been personally concerned, but of which he has had a guilty knowledge. Should he do so, it is a certainty he can. If he likes, more tales of horror will be revealed, and some who are at liberty now will have to succumb to their merited fate. Allusion was made to the fact that Peace had accomplices in his crimes, and that they had a guilty knowledge of murder and of robberies, which he committed. He has, however, gone even further. This week he made use of these extraordinary words: "Yes, it was known what I was doing, and what I have done, and before I die, I will tell something and prove it too, which will show who knew. Before I die, I will make a revelation which will show what one man is, and it will place in the dock a man who occupies a far higher post than ever Mickleham or Druscovito. Roman 999, Palmer never did anything like it." Beyond the facts above recorded, we have further ground for saying that Peace was concerned in the Portland Street murder, London, when it will be remembered that a French lady named Madame Riel was found lying in a cupboard in her house, having had her brains half knocked out. The unfortunate woman had also a thick rope entwined round her neck. The murder had been committed in the coal cellar, and the lady had been dragged upstairs to the cupboard where her body lay all day until it was found by her daughter and others. The cook, a Frenchwoman, absconded to Paris with some of Madame Riel's diamonds and was apprehended in St. Denis by Druscovich, the London detective, and some of the French gendarmerie. It then transpired that she had not committed the murder of her mistress alone, but was helped by more than one. Before the day of his execution, it is confidently believed that he will make such disclosures as will throw even the above revolting confessions into the shade. The Manchester Evening News is responsible for the following story, which, whatever may be said of the facts it narrates, either does not relate to Peace or is altogether mistaken as to time. 4 years ago, Peace, as is perfectly well known, was living in Scotland Street, whence in the beginning of 1875 he removed to Darnall. We have previously stated that when the transference of his picture frame making business from Kenny Onelly to West Street proved a failure, he and his family went to live in Manchester, but that was in 1866, and he had not been there a fortnight before he was caught robbing a house and was sentenced to 8 years penal servitude. As our readers are well aware, Charles Peace, the man condemned to death for the Banner Cross murder on more than one occasion, plied his many vocations in Manchester, and the neighborhood from inquiries made in Levenshulme, it transpires that the notorious criminal resided in that pleasant suburb about 4 years ago. He stayed there only 3 months, and after he left the many freaks, he committed gradually faded from the memory of the local residents. However, not many days ago, a policeman took a photograph of Peace to the locality, and many tradesmen at once recognized him as the man who had formerly lived amongst them. In fact, he had for the time been quite a favorite in the district, and was well known to most of the inhabitants. He rented a small detached house called Olive Cottage in Rushford Park, which he had fairly well furnished. He gave his name as Mr. Thompson, and he was accompanied by a woman who is supposed to be Mrs. Peace. He was never idle and always had some project on foot. He was constantly painting his cottage, and he took such trouble with the work that the neighbors took it for granted that he meant to remain there at least for some years. He was very affable and obliging to everybody, and was, until he decamped without paying his accounts, a great favorite with the tradesmen to ladies. He was especially polite and attentive to every woman he met in a shop. He said good morning in the most agreeable tones, but usually accompanied his attentions by a wink. At the shopman he obtained considerable notoriety by his skill in contorting his features and assuming the appearance of a cripple subsequently. He was known to have been the Burnage bogey and apparition that had scared many people in Burnage Lane, and made numerous folks afraid to use that thoroughfare after nightfall. At the same time, it is somewhat novel to learn that he was never suspected of committing any robbery, nor has it been proved that he gave effect to his thieving propensity in the neighborhood. If he did carry on any business of that nature, he certainly was never mistrusted on that ground, and even now not the slightest accusation is made against him on that score. Ostensibly, he earned his livelihood as an acrobat, and was, we are informed, engaged at the Abbey Hay grounds in this capacity. He was considered to be exceedingly clever, and our informant assures us that he could throw 56-pound weights, about like pounds of sugar. He likewise performed publicly on the violin, and was regarded by the frequenters of the grounds as an able musician. As we have said, he was much esteemed, whilst he lived as Levenshulme, owing chiefly to his unbounded spirits and his witticisms. He was respected as an honest, straightforward man, and no one anticipated that he would disappear so suddenly without paying sundry bills, and least of all was it thought that he would turn out to be one of the most remarkable criminals with which this country has become acquainted for many years. Peace's aid. One of the most curious things about the personality of Peace is the conflict between his appearance and his age. He has been almost invariably spoken of as an old man, and no one seeing him could for a moment suppose that the age we have previously given on the authority of the police notice issued after the Banner Cross affair is the correct one. That notice spoke of him as then 4 to 6 years of age, but as looking 10 years older. We have reason to believe that he is even now 2 years afterwards only 4 to 6, and will not be 4 to 7, until May next. He was born on the 14th of May 1832, and it may perhaps be a convenience if we give the cardinal points of his career in brief chronological form. May 14, born in Nursery Street. Injured at Kelham Mills. To 1848, 2 years illness. 1848 to 1851, employed by Mr. Edward Smith, and in learning to play the violin. Oct. 26, robs Mrs. Ward's house. Dec. 13, sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment, age 19. To 1854, playing the violin at Public Houses, Roman 100. Sep. 7, robs Crookesmore House. Sep. 20, robs Mr. Stewart's house, Brinkcliffe, and many similar robberies about the same time. Oct. 24 years penal servitude, age 22. Sdo. 1858 or 1859, marries Hannah Ward. 1859, Nov. 29. Or 30, daughter Jane Ann born. Aug. 11, penal servitude, age 27. Sdo. 1864, June. 1864 to 1866, picture frame maker in Kennyonley and West Street. Dec. 3, penal servitude, age 34. Sdo. 1872, Aug. 8. 1872 to 1875, picture frame maker in Brocco and Scotland Street. 1875 to Aug. Picture frame maker at Darnall. Aug. 2. Nov. provision shopkeeper in Hull. Nov. 14, leaves Hull suddenly. Nov. 29, shoots Mr. Dyson. 1876 to 1878, committing constant robberies at Nottingham, Hull, Lambeth, Greenwich, and Peckham. Oct. 10, captured by Police Constable Robinson, while committing a burglary, gives name of John Ward. Nov. 6, identified in Newgate as Charles Peace. Nov. 19, penal servitude for life, age 4 to 6. Jan. 22, attempts to commit suicide by leaping from train. Jan. 24, committed for trial on a charge of willful murder. Chapter Roman 171, events before the execution litter from the Habrons. On Monday, February 24th, Mrs. Peace, Willie Ward, and Mr. and Mrs. Bolsover went to Leeds and had a final interview with Peace in his condemned cell in Armley Jail. It was their intention, when they went on Friday, to have taken their leave of him forever in this world, but he begged of them to come again on Monday, so that they might be the last of his relatives he would see before he was executed, and they promised him that they would do so. They left Sheffield by the 10 train, and on arriving at Leeds, they went to the town hall where they found the orders ready for them to admit them to Armley. They got there soon after 1 o'clock, and after waiting for a short time, they were conducted to the cell of the condemned man. Peace was up and sitting at his little table, writing a letter. He appeared better and more cheerful than he had been, although he complained of being very weak, and of suffering much pain, especially in his head. When the chief warder conducted the party into the barred portion of the cell, he called out, "Visitors, peace." The convict looked round, and gave them a smile of recognition. The 2 warders who were in the cell with him lifted him up on taking hold of each arm, and then his chair was removed so close to the bars that when Peace was placed in it again, he was able to rest his hand upon them. 2 chairs were then placed for the accommodation of Mrs. Peace and Mrs. Bolsover, and the 2 men were allowed to occupy the little seat that is always there. These were attentions that had not been shown to visitors on former occasions. Peace was the first to speak, and beginning with his wife, he addressed each by name and asked how they were, seeing that they were scarcely able to suppress their feelings. And to reply to him, he told them he hoped they would restrain their grief, or it would upset him at present. He said he felt very happy, and he did not want to be disturbed. He then informed them that Messrs. Ford and Warren solicitors had been instructed to prepare another will and deed of gift, and that everything necessary had now been done to ensure their obtaining possession of whatever property he had. They would now have no difficulty in claiming all he had possessed, wherever they found it. He next told them that Mr. Bryan had been to see him, and had acknowledged to having in his custody their drawing room suite, the model boat, and case, cockatoo, and cage, and that he would give them up to whoever might be legally entitled to receive them. The chaplain and the warders had heard that statement, and would corroborate it if necessary. The goods were made over to Willie and Mrs. Bolsover, and he told them what he should like each to have, and how they were to proceed to recover the things. While conversing on this point, reference was made to Mrs. Thompson, and Peace said he wished her well, but he was afraid she was going the wrong road. It was his belief that the best that could be done for her would be to place her in a prison or a reformatory for a short time, so as to break her off her intense craving for drink. He was afraid she would make away with herself. On one occasion, when living at Peckham, Mrs. Thompson attempted to strangle herself, and Peace then told her he would rather die on the scaffold than live the life they were living. He now said he little thought, when he made that remark, that he should die on the scaffold. Speaking of the articles he possessed when he was at Peckham, he said there was his small monument, which was missing the larger monument they had now at Darnall, the model boat, and his fiddle walking stick, for of about as well made and curious things as could be seen anywhere. The fiddle is a hollow bamboo cane, to which a tail-piece bridge and screws can be attached, and then it can be played upon. Peace has played upon it many a time. He told his friends if they could collect these 4 articles, and have them exhibited at some music hall in Sheffield, as curiosities, which had belonged to him, they might make money out of them. Peace then alluded to the interview he had with the Rev. Mr. Littlewood, vicar of Darnall, and said he believed he had convinced that gentleman that it was really not him that stole the clock from Darnall's schoolroom. Mr. Littlewood had written to him for information about robberies which had been committed at Darnall and the neighborhood, and he had replied to him telling him that he never did a robbery at Darnall, Hartsworth, or any other place nearer than Sheffield. Mr. Bryan had asked him to send him a letter from the scaffold, and he had promised to do so, but he had not then had time to write it. He said for several days He had done nothing else but write to his relatives and friends. He had got nearly all the letters ready, and he intended to take them with him to the scaffold. You know, he said, my hands will be fastened behind me before I leave my cell, but I shall hold the letters, and when I reach the scaffold I shall ask the chaplain to take them out of my hand, and to post them to you. At this stage of the interview, the sound of men hammering reached the cell. Peace listened for a moment, and then said, that's a noise that would make some men fall on the floor. I hear, they are working at my own scaffold. I have heard them before this morning. The chief warder made answer, you are mistaken, Peace. It is nothing of the sort. Peace, no, I am not. I have not worked so long with wood, without knowing the sound of deals, and they don't have deals inside a prison for anything else than for scaffolds. I have heard them knocking the nails in, and I am sure I am right. But continued he, it does not matter much, it makes no difference to me. I should like to see my own coffin, and my own grave. It would not make the slightest difference to me, because I am prepared. I only look upon the scaffold as a short cut to heaven, alluding to the manner in which he would be buried. He said, I shall be thrown into my grave like a dog, but it won't matter, it will only be my poor body that will be there. My soul, I believe, will be in heaven. Peace then told his friends that he had received a letter from the father and mother of young William Habron, who was undergoing a sentence of penal servitude for life, for the murder of Police Constable Cock, asking him if he really had made a confession, and whether there was any probability of their son returning home to them. Peace said he had written back to them at Manchester telling them that he had made a full confession of the murder, had drawn plans of the place where it occurred, and had sent them to the Home Secretary. He further told them that if their son had justice done to him, he would be set at liberty. Indeed, he had no doubt that he would be restored to them. He said he had asked the father and mother to forgive him for the great wrong he had done them, and had begged of them to ask their son, when he came home, to forgive him, as well he should be dead then, but he hoped to have the forgiveness of them all. Since he had confessed to the crime, he had been much happier than he was before, and he hoped his confession would be believed. Suddenly arousing himself, the convict said, I have a good thing to tell you, and he proceeded to relate the following remarkable incident. He said, you have often heard ministers and others speak of the value of a soul, and what sacrifices they would make to be the means of the conversion of one soul. I believe that, base and bad as I am, I have been the means of the conversion of one man. It occurred when I was brought down from Pentonville to Sheffield on the first occasion to be tried. There was a traveller to Manchester in the same train, and when we reached Sheffield, he left his carriage and came out of mere curiosity to see me taken by the warders from the train to the cab. He went back to his carriage very much impressed with what he had seen of me and heard about me, and began to think about his own past life, and where such a life was likely to lead him. He could not shake off the feelings that had taken possession of him. He began to pray, and has since become a Christian. He has written to the chaplain telling him all the story, and assuring him that through me he had believed, and had found salvation. He asked the chaplain if the prison rules would allow of it to bring his letter and read it to me, and he has done so. Who would have thought, repeated Peace, that a bad base man as I am should have been the means of the conversion of anybody? There is just that one good thing I have done at any rate. Peace then told them that he had received letters from several persons, whose houses he had robbed, telling him that they forgave him, and that they were praying for him. The recollection of such unexpected kindness seemed to quite overpower the convict, and he displayed more feeling than he had done throughout. No. 98. Illustration: Last breakfast. Peace's last breakfast on the morning of execution. Commencing with his daughter, he asked each separately whether there was anything either wanted to ask him or to say to him. They were too much overcome to reply to him for a while, but presently Mrs. Peace said they had plenty to say to him, but not then. He begged of her not to break down, and reminded her that that was the last time she would have an opportunity of speaking to him on this side of the grave. He again asked her what she wished to say, and she reminded him that when there before he promised to pray with them when they came that day. He replied, so I will. The warders assisted him to kneel, and his friends knelt with him, and more than half an hour he prayed with them. He remembered each of them separately, and was especially earnest in his petitions for the little babe that his daughter had with her. He then prayed for young Habron, and asked that his innocence might be proved, and he prayed for Habron's father and mother. With a choking voice almost drowned by the sobs of his relatives, he prayed for the two men he had murdered, and for the relatives they had left behind. And in conclusion, he prayed long and earnestly for himself that his sins might be forgiven him, and that he might meet them all in heaven. There was not much more conversation when Peace and his friends rose from their knees, and then came the moment when the final separation had to take place. For the first time since he was sentenced to death, Peace was allowed to shake hands with his family. Taking the hand of each in turn, he held it for several minutes while he blessed them and prayed for them, and then kissed their hands. When he saw the great distress of his wife and children, he broke down himself, and the last few moments they were all together were truly sorrowful moments for them all. Then they were conducted from the cell, and the interview, which had lasted nearly 3 hours, terminated. The relatives came away with the belief that Peace had committed no other great crimes, or he would have confessed them. Final interview with his brother and other relatives. On Saturday, Dan Peace, his wife John Peace, and Ellen Peace, their son and daughter, and Tom Neal, a relative, had their final interview with him in Armley Jail. Cheerful and apparently unconcerned at his fate, hitherto, the condemned man, knowing that he was speaking to his brother, and those who accompanied him for the last time, lost his old buoyancy of spirits, and although he did not seem at all alarmed at the end awaiting him, appeared very much depressed in mind, and manifested considerable emotion. His brother Dan Peace and the other relatives mentioned were with him nearly 2 hours. The invitation was extended also to Mary Ann Neal, but she was not present at the jail, as she did not arrive in Leeds in time for the interview. The party had been specially invited by Peace, so that he could bid them farewell. They found the convict lying down, but as soon as he saw his brother and the rest of the party, he struggled to raise himself to a sitting posture. Finding it difficult to do this, he asked the warders to raise him. The 2 warders, each getting on one side of the condemned man, took him by the arms and lifted him up. So weak was he that even this alteration of position seemed to exhaust him, and according to his brother Dan, he was a pale, wretched, haggard man altogether, almost feeble as a child. In answer to his brother, who asked, "How are you?" he replied, "I am very, very ill, and very, very weak." And in the opinion of his relatives, he certainly spoke the truth, for they affirm that he was very much weaker than he had ever previously appeared. His head was still bandaged, and he told them that, although the authorities were taking every possible care of him, it seemed impossible to stop the discharge from his wound, and that he felt very weak and depressed in consequence. Suffering much physically, and the subject of much mental depression, he nevertheless made a great effort to welcome his brother and relatives cordially. "I am very glad to see you," he said, and then remarked that he had also invited 2 friends, George Goodlad and Arthur Crackle, to see him. Being asked why they were not present, he said he had discovered that none but his own relatives could be admitted to the jail. He regretted this very much, and said he had got into some little trouble by persisting in asking to see these 2 friends. He admitted now, however, that he had really no right to expect their admission, yet at the same time he stated that he was very, very sorry he should not be allowed to see them, and whilst speaking about his acquaintance with them, and the improbability of meeting them again on this side, the grave betrayed great emotion. "Give them my kind love," he said, "and tell them that I hope God will bless them, and that I shall meet them in heaven." During the interview, he became utterly exhausted, and was compelled to cease from speaking altogether for a few minutes, and even when he was able to converse, it was in such a low tone that his words were almost inaudible to his friends, although they were only a few feet away from him. Dan said he understood that his brother was going to send them all a farewell letter. Peace replied that it was his intention to do so. He was going to write several letters, take them to the scaffold with him, and on arriving there he should seal them up and hand them to the chaplain with the request that he would gratify him by sending them to his friends by as early a post as he could after the execution was over. He hoped, he said, that the letters would be delivered by the same evening's post, and then his relatives would have, before the day was over, his last thoughts about them. The convict then went on to speak about his execution, mentioning details that made some of his relatives shudder, and all of them to grow sad. He said, "I am to die precisely at 8 o'clock. You will know when it is all over with me. After I am dead, they will hold an inquest on my body, and I shall be buried, I expect, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon." Here he paused for a few minutes, partly because he seemed to be exhausted, and partly because he was overcome by his own feelings. His relatives, seeing the distressed state he was in, broke down utterly, and for some little time there was nothing to be heard but their sobs. Peace was the first to recover himself, and going on to speak of what would be done on Tuesday, he said, "I shall be buried in my clothes, just as I am. They might, however, change my shirt, or something like that." Then again, giving way and betraying more feeling than could possibly have been expected in a man who had led the life he had led, and committed the crimes to which he had confessed, he said, "I shall be thrown into my grave, and there will be no service read over me, no sermon preached, nothing of that sort." He again seemed exhausted and stopped speaking, and his relatives could only look at him and weep. Peace after a while aroused himself again, and alluding to the men he had murdered, and the robberies he had committed, he said, "I wish it was in my power to restore them to life, and to replace all the property I have stolen," but he added, "that can never be." His relatives asked him if he had any wish that they could carry out, or anything that they could do to please him. Peace replied with more animation than he had shown so far during the interview, "Yes, there is one thing you can do, and I wish you would do it. I want you on the day of my execution to go to the cemetery and plant a flower or a little tree on my mother's grave, and on another grave that he named, and then when you see them, think of me, and where I am and where I am buried." His relatives promised him that his wish in this respect should be gratified, and he seemed much pleased. Peace, referring again to his execution, said he did hope he should have strength to walk to the scaffold, but he was afraid he should not be able to do so, was so very weak. Dan replied, "Yes, I should like thee to be able to walk, stand it like a man." Peace answered with much show of feeling, "Dan, thee knows I shall do that if I can." Dan afterwards asked him why he jumped out of the train when coming from London to Sheffield, and he repeated what he had said before, that he wanted to commit suicide. He said he neither wanted to spend his life in prison and then die there, nor to pass through what he had had to pass through, since he thought if he had killed himself, then he might have been buried amongst his friends at Darnall. Much of the convict's conversation during the interview was on religious topics. He said he wished he could speak to all his friends, and then he would entreat them never to enter a public house or to gamble or go to handicaps. He made a personal appeal to Dan and begged of him to change his mode of life and to become a good man, or as he put it, to become religious in this strain. He talked for a long time at intervals, resting from sheer exhaustion, and then going on again. Much of what he said, however, they could not hear. He spoke in so low a tone of voice, he made no further reference to either of the murders he had committed. When the time came for the interview to terminate, not only the condemned man, but Dan and all his friends were much affected, and as may be imagined, the final farewell was a very sorrowful scene. His last utterances to them were kind remembrances to George Goodlad and Cragg, and a promise that he would write to them both. The relatives left the cell, feeling that they had indeed taken leave of a poor, wretched, haggard man. As the party were returning from Armley to Leeds, they were accosted by Mrs. Bryan and Mrs. Thompson, who were urgent in their inquiries as to what had passed between them and dear Jack. Dan, we understand, took no notice of them, but the others conversed with the two women a short time. They were much impressed with Mrs. Thompson, and greatly astonished that she should ever have taken up with a man like him. Peace as a public performer. An Ashton correspondent telegraphs it is a well-known fact that Peace on more than one occasion plied his many vocations in Manchester and the neighbouring towns. From inquiries made in Levenshulme, it transpires that the notorious criminal resided in that suburb about 4 years ago. He stayed there only 4 months, and after he left, the local residents thought little more about him. A day or two ago, however, a policeman took a photograph of Peace to the locality, and many tradesmen at once recognized the portrait as that of the man who had formerly lived among them, and for a time had been quite a favorite in the district. He rented a small detached house called Olivet Cottage in Rushford Road Park, which he fairly well furnished. He gave his name as Thompson, and he was accompanied by a woman supposed to have been Mrs. Peace. He was never idle and always had some project on foot. He was constantly painting his cottage, and took such trouble with the work that the neighbors took it for granted that he meant to remain there for some years. He was very affable and obliging to everybody, and was, until he decamped, without paying his accounts, a great favorite with the tradesmen. To ladies, he was especially polite and attentive, indeed, almost too much so, for if he met a woman in a shop, He would say good morning in an agreeable tone, but usually accompanied his salutation by a wink at the shopman. He obtained considerable notoriety by his skill in contorting his features and assuming the appearance of a cripple subsequently. He was known to have been the Burnage bogey and apparition that had scared many people in Burnage Lane and made folks afraid to use the thoroughfare after nightfall. At the same time, it is remarkable that he was never suspected of committing any robbery, nor, has it been proved, that he gave effect to his thievish propensity in the neighborhood. Ostensibly, he earned his livelihood as an acrobat and was engaged at the Abbey Hay Park in this capacity. He was considered exceedingly clever, and it is stated that he could throw half-hundred weights about like pounds of sugar. He likewise performed publicly on the violin and was regarded by frequenters of the grounds as an able musician. A Bristol gentleman who was staying with Mr. Plimsoll Roman 1000p at the time peace called upon him to submit plans for raising sunken vessels, said that these plans were introduced as a grand scheme for raising the Vanguard captain and Eurydice. The stranger wished Mr. Plimsoll to introduce him to the First Lord of the Admiralty, and Mr. Samuda and Mr. Reed. Mr. Plimsoll declined desiring him, if he wished to communicate further with him, to do so in writing through his visitor from Bristol. That gentleman afterwards received letters asking to be supplied with the names of the owners of any sunken vessels in the Bristol Channel or on the western coastline. The writer was informed of the wreck on the Hook sands of a Greek brig, for which the owner wanted 50. He thereupon asked Mr. Plimsoll's Bristol friend to pay the 50, assuring him that the money would be refunded, but as may be supposed asked in vain. The Ashton-under-Lyne correspondent of the Central News wrote from inquiries made in Levenshulme, it transpires that Peace about 4 years ago came to reside in that place, but stayed only 3 months. He had been forgotten, but several of the inhabitants, on seeing a portrait of the convict, a day or two ago, recognized in him their neighbor Mr. Thompson, who resided in a small detached house called Olivet Cottage in Rushford Road Park. He lived with a woman who is supposed to have been Mrs. Peace, and being always affable and obliging was a great favorite until he decamped without paying his accounts. He was never suspected of robbery, but in consequence of fancied apparitions, the people of the neighborhood were afraid to use the thoroughfare close to his house after dark. He ostensibly earned his livelihood as an acrobat, and was considered extremely clever in this direction. Peace's will was drawn by Deputy Sheriff Ford, member of a local firm of solicitors. It extended to but 4 or 5 lines, and bequeathed property to Hannah Ward or Peace his wife. The text was not to be published until the day of his execution. In regard to the former, will he made bequeathing everything to Mrs. Thompson, the latter's sister, it is said burnt the document. Chapter Roman 172, The Execution of Charles Peace. On Tuesday, Feb 25, 1879, Peace was executed within the walls of Armley Jail, Leeds, at 8 o'clock in the morning. The convict had a short sleep, just after 11 o'clock the night before. At 11:30, the governor of the jail, Mr. Keene, visited him and remained with him until 20 minutes past 1. Immediately after the governor left, the chaplain, the Rev. O. Cookson, came. As Peace seemed drowsy and inclined for sleep, the chaplain retired at 2 o'clock. Peace slept calmly and soundly until 5:45 next morning, when the chaplain again joined him. Shortly afterwards he breakfasted, and was able to take a hearty meal of toast, bacon, and eggs and tea. He had eaten well all throughout, especially during the previous few days, and had apparently become much stronger. Between 7 and 8 o'clock, a number of people began to assemble outside the prison walls. At first their numbers were not large, but as 8 o'clock neared, their strength increased largely. The reporters arrived about 7 o'clock, only 4 were present. They were conducted by 2 warders from the entrance office to the scaffold, which was erected on the west side of the prison, in an angle of the hospital, which stands apart from the prison. Up to that time the morning had been clear and fair, but about 10 minutes to 8 there was a slight fall of snow, which did not last long. At 7:45 the prison bell began to toll and continued tolling until 8:15. The scaffold was only within view from the western end of the corridor, at the other extremity of which the condemned cell is situated. The prisoners in this part of the prison were removed to another part of the building in order that they might not witness the execution. About 5 minutes to 8 o'clock, a procession emerged into the yard, taking a winding course to the prison wall to the scaffold. First came the undersheriff Mr. Gray, and the governor of the jail Mr. Keene bearing rods of office. Then followed the chaplain in his canonicals reading the burial service, but he selected passages from the scriptures, which form the usual service at the jail. On such occasions, immediately behind Mr. Cookson, came the prisoner. He was supported by 2 warders, and behind came Marwood. As at the trial he was dressed in yellowish drab, the Pentonville convict suit. His arms were pinioned, his step was weak and feeble, but he required less support than could have been anticipated. There was no sign of terror or breaking down. He was very pale, but in his general appearance, little altered from that which he presented when in the dock on his trial. If anything, he looked in better health than at that time. Instead of looking on the ground and gazing vacantly, he peered round, as if looking for someone. The object of that was perhaps explained by what took place afterwards. The procession was brought up by 6 or 8 warders. Beyond the persons already enumerated, and Mr. Price the prison surgeon, no one else was present. The prisoner ascended the scaffold with a comparatively firm tread. Although he had to be assisted up the steps, he was placed upon the drop with his head forward towards the spectators. Whilst Marwood was tying his feet, the chaplain continued reading selected portions of the scripture. The prisoner also kept repeating, "God, have mercy upon me, Christ, have mercy on me." As Marwood, who stood behind the culprit, was preparing the cap to pull over his face, the convict evinced slight signs of irritation at the unexpected haste, and again signified his wish to speak. A brief space was accordingly allowed, and looking round amongst the small company before him, he addressed them in a clear, firm voice, the tones of which must have been heard outside the prison walls. He said, "You gentlemen reporters, I wish you to notice the few words I am going to say. You know what my life has been. It has been base. And had I wished to ask the world, after you have seen my death, what man could die as I die, if he did not die in the fear of the Lord? Tell all my friends that I feel sure that they sincerely forgive me, and that I am going into the kingdom of heaven, or else to that place, prepared for us to rest until the day of judgment. I have no enemies that I feel to have on this earth. I wish all my enemies, or those that would be so, I wish them well. I wish them to come to the kingdom of heaven at last. And now to one and all I say goodbye. Heaven bless you, and may you all come to the kingdom of heaven at last. Amen. Say that my last respects is to my dear children, and to their dear mother. I hope that no paper will disgrace itself by taunting them and jeering them on my account, but will have mercy upon them. God bless you, my children, each goodbye, and heaven bless you, goodbye and amen." After the convict had thus delivered himself, Marwood drew the white cap over his face, and whilst this was being done, Peace turned his head slightly towards the executioner and said, "I should like to have a drink. Have you a cup of water you could give me?" No attention was paid to this request, and Marwood proceeded with his duty. From beneath the cap, however, the voice of the culprit was again heard, "May I not have a drink?" And again, as the rope was being adjusted to his neck, he exclaimed, "Oh, that's too tight." The voice of the chaplain was then heard saying, "In the midst of life, we are in death. Of whom may we seek succor? But of thee, O Lord, who for our sins are justly displeased." Then was uttered the commendation, "Into thy hands, O Lord, we commend this soul, now about to depart from the body. Lord Jesus, receive his spirit. Amen." As those words were being uttered, Marwood stepped forward and drew the bolt. The drop fell, and the body disappeared. There was a distinct thud, but not the slightest quivering of the rope, and Mr. Price, the surgeon, said death must have been instantaneous. The drop was 9 ft in long. It was about 4 minutes past 8 when the execution took place, and the black flag was immediately hoisted from the prison tower as an indication to the crowd outside that all was over. Those who had been much with Peace during the last few days said that the speech from the scaffold was not altogether unexpected by them, because the convict was a man who talked much. What he said during the previous few days was fully in keeping with what he said on the scaffold, and they believed what he said and died penitent. No confession was handed to any of the prison officials, and they had nothing to communicate except what had already been mentioned in the public press relating to the Whalley Range murder, the documents relative to which had been forwarded to the Home Office. Another account. The Press Association correspondent gave the following account: "One of the most extraordinary criminals reaped his well-merited reward at the hands of the common hangman at Armley Jail. It is unnecessary to name the culprit, for the name of peace has been before the public every morning for 2 or 3 months. When on his trial and as the curtain lifted from his life, he has gloated over his exploits, and notwithstanding his profession of penitence, few would doubt that if he had been left free, he would have pursued the same murderous course. There was a mingling with wonder and horror that a man who robbed houses 2 or 3 times a night, and for months successively in the districts where he prowled around as burglar, should have escaped the police, should have carried off his booty, and sold it, should have passed as a respectable man in the neighborhoods where he lived, and even palmed himself off as one interested in science. Touching appeals to the reporters from the scaffold, and the whining, imploring way in which he begged Marwood to wait a bit when the noose was being adjusted, showed that he was wanting in courage. One can hardly conceive that any man could really pity that monster of iniquity who had lived in robbery through his life, and who had not scrupled, when interfered with in his nefarious deeds, to use his revolver in shooting down whomsoever he might chance to encounter. He shot the policeman at Blackheath, he shot Constable Cock at Manchester, and actually attended the trial and conviction of another man for the murder, whose sentence, however, was providentially commuted. And shortly after this, he shot Mr. Dyson in as cold-blooded a murder as has ever been revealed, and further, he was guilty of attempting to slur with dishonor the wife of the man he murdered. After his conviction, he was removed from Wakefield to Armley Jail for greater security. The prison was considered by Lieutenant Colonel Jebb, Inspector of Prisons, as the best and most substantial of its kind in the kingdom. It lies to the west of Leeds, about 1.5 miles from the chief seat of the cloth trade. It is an imposing castellated stone structure, and its walls and towers are blackened with smoke from the neighboring chimneys. Standing on the crest of a ridge overlooking the valley of the Aire, it has at its base the Midland and Great Northern lines, and the Aire flowing sluggishly along and viewed from its front or eastern side, Leeds assumes a horseshoe shape with its smoky chimneys, and to the northwest lies to the famous Kirkstall Abbey. The prison is a conspicuous object for many miles around it, is worked on the silent system, and each prisoner has his or her work to do at the invisible results of the crank, or in making cockomatting, or in picking oakum. It has 4 wings which radiate from a common center, and there is an exercising ground situate between each of the wings. They are 2 stories in height, and they have cells underneath where prisoners are put on bread and water for punishment. It was built in 1847, and for many years Mr. Keene had been the governor. In the murderer's cell of the prison situate on the first floor of the wing, radiating to the northwest, Peace had been kept in close confinement ever since January 29. He was closely watched by the warders with a ceaseless vigilance from the day of his sentence up to the time of his execution. His relatives were never allowed to pass the part of the prison room partitioned off, with a few iron railings extending from the floor to the ceiling. His cell, including the part so partitioned off, was not more than 6 yards square, and visiting it a few minutes after Peace left it for the last time, one must have thought the warders, the chaplain, and the governor would be glad that their unceasing vigilance was at an end. It contained a bed, a table, and 2 stools near the table fastened tightly to the ground, and here it was that 2 warders were at all times in attendance, one sitting, and the other patrolling with the convict, always in between them. The guard was relieved about every 3 hours. The room was only dimly lighted by 2 slits in the stone opening into the courtyard, and about 20 yards from the scaffold, which Peace must have known was being knocked together for him when the workmen were busy with it. He had 2 rugs and 2 blankets on his camp bedstead, and here it is well to say that the reports about his not taking food were erroneous, for he always took kindly to whatever was provided for him. It was feared that because he had made the desperate attempt to jump out of the express train, that he would commit suicide if he had a chance in his cell. The governor, however, whilst enforcing every precaution to prevent the convict succeeding in any attempt upon his life, considered that the criminal had not sufficient courage to do that, and certainly his conduct on the gallows corroborated that view. He professed resignation and submissiveness, but these were not to be relied upon. His whole life had been a lie. Often as he had been in prison from 1854 to 1858, from 1859 to 1864, and from 1866 to 1872, he had conducted himself with such propriety as to earn the rewards of docility to jail discipline and the consequent shortening of his sentence. But the moment he was freed confinement, He plunged again into the desperate courses of a criminal career, stopping at nothing, not even at murder, to achieve his purpose of robbery. He appeared cheerful and resolute, not in the demeanor of bravado, but in that of absolute submission to what he had felt from the moment. The death sentence was passed, could not be averted by any accident of fortune or intercession of clemency. The chaplain, the Rev. Mr. Oswald Cookson, Roman 1000a, prayed with peace daily, and gradually, the culprit appeared to follow the prayers, for within the last few days of his life, he had parted with his relations, his reputed wife and stepson, and he had confessed the rascalities and atrocities of years of crime. From boasting of his deeds, he pretended to have become penitent. He was anxious to show that he had been pierced with contrition to such a depth as to give advice of a moral character to those who visited him. He stoutly maintained what he had said all along, that there was a struggle between him and Dyson, and that the revolver went off accidentally. The wretched man slept perfectly sound and calm on his last morning, till 5:15 when the chaplain entered, and peace woke up. Devotional exercises were then engaged in for about an hour. He appeared to betray by the fervor of his utterance, to his responses to the prayers, that he feared the doom awaiting him within an hour. This, however, did not prevent his partaking heartily of breakfast, which was now brought, consisting of eggs, slice of bacon toast, and tea. At 7:45, the prison bell began to toll with a dismal noise, and thus it continued to do till 8:15. Just then Marwood was introduced. The convict submitted to have a belt fastened round the waist tightly, and was securely attached to this belt by straps. The undersheriff, Mr. William Gray, the governor, Mr. Keene, and the principal warders formed a group in the gloomy chamber, all standing in front of the criminal, who submitted passively to the pinioning process. The death sentence was read to him, and then a procession was formed to go to the gallows. The gibbet was erected within 20 yards of the doomed man's cell, but he was compelled to travel the whole length of the corridor, about 80 yards, and on reaching the courtyard, owing to a number of dressed stones lying about, the procession skirted the outer wall of the prison, and traversed a distance of 80 yards before reaching the gibbet. This latter was a black, grim structure, led about 6 feet into a hollowed-out piece of ground, the platform only 6 feet from the level of the courtyard, being reached by half a dozen wooden steps. The lower part of the structure was draped in black sacking, and the whole timber framework was painted black. Also to this place, at 20 minutes, to 8, the Press Association reporter, and 3 other representatives of the press, who on this occasion became officials on duty to conform with the Private Execution Act, by signing their names as witnesses of the due carrying out of the law, were escorted by an inspector of warders. We waited for a few minutes, listening for the approach of the procession, which was now in readiness to start along the corridor, and then issue from the door beyond the snow-covered stones strewed about. The procession was to take a beaten path, which however was very slippery with frozen snow and ice, and we were to keep by the scaffold. At the front of the jail where we entered here, and there were groups of 3 and 4 people. On learning that the hanging would take place at the other side of the building, they made a circuit of the building through the fields. We heard a hubbub of voices, and afterwards learned that not less than 1,000 people had congregated outside. The crowd consisted of men, women, and children, and as they could not see the scaffold, all eyes were turned to the center tower, where a person was in readiness to hoist the black flag. As soon as the fate of the criminal was sealed, policemen were stationed to keep the people from the prison walls to prevent their hearing what was taking place. But a rush was made, and they crowded round the wall, from which place they could distinctly hear the chaplain going through the burial service and peace, making his last dying speech from the scaffold. Inside the jail, the north wind was blowing piercingly cold. At 8:05, a movement was made by the warders at the entrance of Peace's part of the building, and then issued forth the ceremonial procession, in which Peace was principal actor. First came the governor and undersheriff, abreast, carrying a white and black wand respectively, and at a few yards' distance behind the chaplain, slightly in front of Peace, who was supported by 2 warders, Marwood walking after them. The procession was closed up by a number of warders walking 2 abreast. Peace was uncovered, and in his prison dress, he cast his eye towards the 4 reporters at the farther side of the courtyard, and then his quick piercing eyes seemed to fasten upon the scaffold, at which he gave a momentary shudder. He still kept looking towards it, and partly in consequence of this, he missed his footing 2 or 3 times on the slippery and undulating pathway. Turning to within half a dozen yards of the scaffold, he cast an imploring look towards the reporters, and then he was helped up the steps onto the platform, where a new 212-in rope was dangling in the center overhead. He was nervous and agitated. He stood with his hands strapped to his side, and now and then he opened and shut them with a nervous twitch. Meanwhile, the chaplain was reading the solemn burial service of the Church of England, and the governor, two warders, and the executioner Marwood took their stand round the murderer. He looked ghastly pale. He had grown a little hair just behind his forehead, and he had a white mustache and a grey close-cropped beard. Marwood took the rope down, and whilst the warders were placing Peace on the center of the drop, he was keeping his eye on Marwood at his side, who seemed anxious to put the white cap over the culprit. "Stop a minute," said Peace. "Let me hear this." The chaplain read on the Lord. "Have mercy upon us," to which Peace joined, "O God, have mercy upon me, Christ, have mercy upon me." Marwood was about putting on the white cap when the little nervous man excitedly turned his head to Marwood and said, "I want to speak." He then addressed the reporters in a clear voice. Marwood instantly, on the conclusion of the speech, drew the cap over Peace's head and finally adjusted the ring, the condemned crying out, "Almighty God, have mercy upon me," and next ejaculated, "I should like to have a drink." The chaplain continued in the midst of life, "We are in death, to whom may we seek for succor, but to thee." Peace was trembling, and his hands were being moved nervously, when he vehemently cried out, "Can't I have a drink? Oh, it's too tight." Marwood quietly remarked, "Keep still, I won't hurt you." A bit the chaplain was repeating the words, "I am the resurrection and the life," to which Peace responded, "God bless you, goodbye." Marwood stepped back, pulled a string, a bolt was removed, the platform fell, and the wretched murderer was launched into eternity. Marwood had done his work most effectively. The victim never quivered. The bystanders looked down into the space beneath the scaffold, and then only a few officials were left on duty. At 9 o'clock he was cut down, very little altered in appearance, so far as the bloodless face was concerned. The mark of the rope was clearly shown. The body was then conveyed to the dead house. After the inquest, the lid was adjusted to the coffin, and without mourners, without others than officials to bear the burden, the body was taken into the burial yard of the prison and lowered into the grave reserved for murderers. Others are in company in the dust adjacent, who have suffered the same dread penalty and been borne to the same ignominious repose like others. Also, he had a stone erected with his initials and date of the execution. In his last hours of the condemned, a great Frenchman shows us, after his fashion of mingled power and fantasy, the sentenced wretch more appalled by the retrospect of an evil life than by the doom fast darkening upon him. The interest a master of sensational phrases contrived to enlist for his subject is paralleled in actual fact by the curiosity with which the last hours of the criminal piece were regarded. This curiosity was not unnatural. It had been stimulated by the startling rumors which had been in circulation respecting certain confessions it was said the prisoner intended to make before he suffered. In the old Tyburn days, the great attraction of the gallows was for many not so much the sight of a fellow creature dangling from a rope as his dying speech and confession. The British public supped full with the mere horror of executions in times when stealing from the person any trifle value for 12 pence was grand larceny punishable by death, and offenders were turned off every day. But there was always the prospect that the criminal would die gamethat, is meet his end, with bravado and blasphemy. If he died penitent, he denied himself his right to address the multitude from the drop, and whether he spoke or perished in silence, the inventive writers who pervade the literature of the gallows made his biography their care, and hawked his miserable chronicle among the eager crowd for whom his hanging made a holiday. The brutal longing to hear the worst and last that could be learnt of an assassin or a highwayman can no more be gratified in the old ways. Turpin and Duval and Gilderoy died in spite of the law like heroes of romance. Fair ladies shed tears upon their irons in the cells of Newgate, and when each fascinating scoundrel appeared with a noose on his neck and a bouquet in his buttonhole, the male beholders cheered while the women sobbed. Justice had her revenge, but her victims lived in the ballad poetry of the nation, for even at this very day, the songs made upon some of these ancient marauders are sung in parts of Great Britain. All that is over now, fortunately, and all the unhallowed glory in which formerly a villain died no longer demoralizes. If Peace were reserving himself for display, As for the neck verse of Harrowby written of by Sir Walter Scott, he would have had to do without an audience. A century since, and such a man would have set London society crazy over his career, he would have made the most of his opportunities, seeing what a figure he had managed to preserve long after the novelty of his deeds might be supposed to have waned. The publicity into which the man had been forced was largely responsible for his demoralizing eminence. It was raking in the sink to publish every shred of correspondence which passed between the condemned brigand and his paramours. He treated these women cruelly. It would seem they often had black eyes and bore the wheels of a whip. It is stated that Peace went always armed with a revolver and a knife, the manner in which he used his weapon against Dyson, and Robinson proved that he was prepared to take human life on the least provocation, and gives a strong prima facie color to the fearful tales that were told of him. There is one good reason why it is well. This man was eliminated from the community he belonged from all we know of him, to the most desperate and dangerous of his class. Very few British highwaymen or burglars have shown themselves bloodthirsty, as well as dishonest most of them. Indeed, if they carried firearms seldom had the heart to load them, and preferred losing their plunder to taking it by fatal violence. But Peace had the ferocious spirit of a Sicilian brigand. Mr. Dyson walked towards him, and he shot him. He was as murderously prompt with policeman Robinson. His method does not suit in England, and if there were some who admired the man and his career, it would be a corrective of their admiration to know that the peculiarities of procedure which gave their hero his notoriety are specially repugnant to the laws and revolting to the people of this country. The moral of Peace's career. The last days, the confession, the letters, the will, the dying speech, and the execution of Charles Peace will make a sensational history of the most dangerous description. The large place which his villainy marked for him in the public attention for several weeks proved a stimulant to many a depraved appetite for notoriety. All persons, in short, who have had occasion to watch the effect upon the public of the noisy passage of a great malefactor from the day of sentence to the morning of doom, must have remarked the extraordinary copiousness of the record of the sayings, doings, and writings of Charles Peace with positive alarm. The rogue's march seemed to merge into a hymn of praise, and then into a chant of victory at the gallows. People shuddered when the murderer's repulsive features were first displayed in the shops, in a row with the ostentatious beauties and the unabashed actresses of the day. No wonder, said the crowd, that this monster is the hero of a string of crimes, just as Sidney Smith said of a saintly man that he carried the 10 Commandments written in his face. Might it have been remarked of Charles Peace that the Newgate calendar was wrought in his? But there is a fascination in the horrible as well as in the beautiful, and the people who were dismayed, while they contemplated the brutal job, presently craved details of the crimes its owner had committed, of the manner in which he wrote and talked of the human creatures who had associated with, nay, loved him, of his appetite for the fare of the condemned cell, and his capacity for sleep with Marwood for the subject of his dreams. The poisonous food was forthcoming in large doses, and be it observed, its production is the inevitable, the forced result of the demand. The blame lies not with the newspapers, but with the system of turning upon the murderer's cell a light as fierce as that which the poet tells us beats upon a throne. The journalist is the servant of the public, and the appetite for news about the murderer's daily habits being strong, he has no choice but to provide all he can obtain. He may condemn the publication of a rogue's correspondence with his wife, his mistress, and his pals, but he cannot prevent it. It has often been our duty to comment with severity upon such a parade of crime, as the career of the man who was hanged in Armley jail yard on that Tuesday afforded to the British public. In Peace's instance, however, the abuse was carried to the wildest excess. The public were with the Banner Cross murderer night and day from the hour when he was condemned to the gallows. The comings and goings of the unfortunate people connected with him were chronicled as methodically as the court newsman imparts to the public the airings and the dinners of the royal family. That on the fatal morning, bacon and eggs were provided for him before his long journey, and that albeit livid white he ate with some relish before he sat down to write a parting letter to his wife. Fairfax, in the biography of Charles Peace, which the world that dotes on Newgate records would not willingly let die, we have chronicled them accordingly. The culprit was even allowed to address a homily to the reporters in the character of a man who had done with the wickedness of this world, and would be in a few moments among the angels. He gave friends and foes his blessing, and wished they might follow him to heaven. There are still people who, as the author of the fable for critics remarks, think it looks odd to choke a poor scamp for the glory of God. These old-fashioned folk may be also of the opinion that there is something very monstrous in this spectacle of a malefactor speaking with the rope round his neck to you reporters. And they may go on their way, pondering on the strangeness of a society in which the honest and heroic poor die by the hundred unsolaced by the priest, while a holy man stands at the elbow of the murderer on the gallows, and as the hangman draws the bolt cries, "Lord Jesus, receive his soul." When Thurtell stood upon the scaffold at Tyburn, the championship of England was about to be decided, and while the hangman was adjusting the fatal noose, the culprit expressed his regret that his execution could not be delayed for an hour or two, that before paying the penalty of his crimes, he might have the satisfaction of knowing to which of the combatants the belt had been awarded. Whether this great criminal's attitude in the presence of death contrasts favorably or unfavorably with that assumed upon the gallows by Charles Peace is a question upon which we will not venture to express an opinion. Both Thurtell and Peace, however, afford perhaps the most remarkable illustrations we could instance of the curious fact that great scoundrels apparently shuffle off the mortal coil more comfortably than honest people. Possibly it is that long inurement to crime has so blunted their sensibilities that even conscience no longer makes cowards of them, and Hamlet's great query to die, to sleep, perchance to dream, troubles them not. But in whatever way the phenomenon is to be accounted for, the fact remains that condemned culprits, as a rule, mount the scaffold with a firm step, and while consenting to death, apparently conquer agony. Charles Peace proved no exception to the rule. He slept well up to within an hour and a half of his execution, and on awaking parduoc of a hearty breakfast. On emerging from the condemned cell to the courtyard in which the scaffold was erected, he heard the bell tolling for his own funeral, without giving signs of terror. Upon the scaffold, he appeared to be in the same contented frame of mind as the celebrated essayist and father of English journalism, who on his deathbed requested his son to come and see how a Christian could die, but observed Thackeray, unfortunately, he died of brandy. It must be confessed that it somewhat detracts from Peace's piety that he did not take refuge in the consolations of religion until he found there was no chance of his regaining his liberty. We fear it would have been a dangerous experiment to have let him loose again upon society, even as a converted man. There seems to be something repulsive in the idea of such a consummate rascal making sure of heaven, with so little effort, after having spent his whole life in the shameless violation of every law of God and man. The wretch was so steeped in vice and crime that his death seems to remove him beyond the liberality of the old de Mortuis injunction. Had he been really repentant of his atrocious crimes, rather than of the fearful consequences to which they had brought him, it would surely have been more becoming on his part, had he humbled himself in the profoundest silence, and not run the risk of intensifying the enormity of his hypocrisy, by palming himself off as a local preacher upon the scaffold. When Christ converted people, he told them to go home and keep quietcy, "Thou sayest nothing to any man." But nowadays converts seem to be encouraged to advertise themselves as much as possible. Charles Peace's demeanor in the presence of the hangman is to our thinking far from being edifying. The sooner all memory of the career of this cunning, cruel, and abject criminal is obliterated, the better it will be for society. No. 99. Illustration: scene on the scaffold. Scene on the scaffold, Merwood pinioning Peace's legs. We may search in vain through the annals of crime to find the record of a more infamous life than his. The fellow's assumption of virtue was perhaps the most horrible thing about him. "Now, sir," he is reported to have said to the Rev. Mr. Littlewood, "I want to tell you, and I want you to believe me when I say that I always made it a rule during the whole of my career never to take life if I could avoid it." Virtuous man, and it does seem odd, he further observed, that in the end I should have to be hanged for having taken lifeth, very thing I was always so anxious to avoid. It is a pity he forgot his intense respect for the sanctity of human life on so many occasions. The vagabond who will talk like this, after having for years prowled about at night, with a six-chambered revolver strapped to his wrist, must be an extraordinary combination of the heartless ruffian and the sneaking hypocrite. In addition to this, Peace was perhaps the most accomplished burglar that ever necessitated the vigilance of the police. But the terms murderer and burglar are scarcely adequate to paint the blackness of his character, for on his own confession, this man actually sat in court at the Manchester Assizes, and heard the sentence of death passed upon an innocent man for a murder which he himself had committed. "I like to attend trials," he said, "and I determined to be present. I left home for Manchester, not telling my family where I had gone. I attended the Assizes for 2 days, and heard the youngest of the brothers, as I was told they were sentenced to death now. Sir, some people will say that I was a hardened wretch for allowing an innocent man to suffer for my crime. Undoubtedly, all people would peace, however, was too much satisfied with his good luck to permit his conscience to trouble him about the matter. If capital punishment is justifiable, Marwood unquestionably did the state some service in ridding society of Charles Peace. There is something terrible in the contemplation of a misspent life like his, and the wretched man's interment, after the terrible scene upon the gallows was enacted, would make sadder even the saddest of all cemeteries, namely, the burial yard of a county prison. The mercy which is infinite, and the repentance which secures it, invited Peace, as they invite all other mortals, and upon the mystery of the felon's grave all comment is struck dumb. It may be noted, however, that though the last utterances of the dying criminal were full of contrition and paternal solicitude, there is a certain tone in the whole speech which suggests that the man had in reality not awakened to a full estimate of the greatness of his offenses. His demeanor throughout indicates the same moral defect. There were in his character many signs of an idiosyncrasy which, like kleptomania and other depraved mental compulsions, dragged the possessed being into the vicious path and disabled the faculty of remorse. Peace had the cunning of the rogue plus that of the intelligent man he was, but until the 11th hour he was playing a part. First he shammed ill, then he had a spell of sullen silence, which was succeeded by that fit of communicativeness oral and written, which has taken up so much space in the newspapers. He appears to have made a great many contradictory statements or confessions, and if all that have been published as such are really his, there is some difficulty in accepting as authentic even the most solemn of these avowals on the scaffold. One of these confessions purported to be an admission of a series of murders known and unknown committed by him singly, or with accomplices in London or the provinces. If Peace reduced this horrid catalogue to 2, and he in troth, and in fact stated what appeared in print, would require clear corroborative evidence to sustain anything he asserted. Peace declared in more than one of his many confessions that he murdered the policeman Cock at Whalley Range near Manchester in 1876. For this crime, a young man named Habron was sentenced to death. The sentence was commuted to penal servitude for life, and that terrible penalty the innocent and signally unfortunate man was still undergoing. When Peace was first rendered amenable, the real assassin, according to his own avowal, was present in court at the trial, and heard Habron sentenced. The same night Peace shot Mr. Dyson. There can be little question, but he would have held his tongue to save his neck, had the poor man been permitted to suffer for his crime, and been put to death for it. The one point of relief in an ugly picture in this where we find justice done to the innocent by the detection of the guilty. On the other hand, the vindication suggests grave reflections respecting the adequacy of trial by jury and the security of our criminal procedure to place the guilt where it is charged on the guilty head, and save the innocent from destruction by circumstantial evidence. Visit to the condemned cell after the execution. The Central News reporter telegraphed the prison chaplain was deeply affected on returning from the execution of Peace on Tuesday morning. Dr. Price, the jail physician, escorted him to his official residence. Undersheriff Gray, his clerk Mr. Waite, and the governor, together with the representatives of the press, in leaving the fatal spot, passed into the wing of the jail from which Peace had so recently emerged. The cell, which the condemned man had occupied, was also passed. The gas was still burning in it, and the door was open. On the bed was a closed Bible and a prayer book, whilst the convict's shoes, slippers, wide-awake hat, and other articles of apparel were placed on the benches in the inner cell. On the little table were a number of books and several sheets of paper, on which the convict had apparently been scribbling. A tin-quart measure, nearly full of milk, also stood on the table. Scenes outside the jail. It was a fearful morning, the air was raw, and a searching wind pierced through one almost to the bone. Yet the fields dividing the jail from the houses near seemed to be covered with people almost immediately. They ran eagerly to get the best places that could be obtained. Everybody ran, and everybody was anxious to get the best places. The peculiar coign of vantage known only to the experienced was said to be behind the prison near the hospital. This was where the scaffold had been erected, and it was said that outside the walls at that point the falling of the trap and the thud caused by the jerk to the rope could be distinctly heard. It is no exaggeration to say that at least 500 people assembled at this spot, and that until the hoisting of the flag, the most careful silence was preserved. Indeed, some of the people who were standing there declared that they heard Peace speaking, but could not make out his words. A large knot of people numbering several hundred appeared at the outer gates, without any warning and undisturbed, took up positions commanding a view of the flagpole on the high tower. About 10 minutes to 8 snow began to fall slightly, but it soon discontinued, and at 5 minutes to 8 the weather was fine again. What a rude, unsympathetic, ribald crowd that was drawn together merely by morbid curiosity. Many of them laughed, smiled, and joked at the dread ordeal, which the convict was even then undergoing. They spoke of him as at that moment submitting to the pinions, and wondered with a fiendish glee how he liked the process. Women and girls vied with each other in depicting his agony as a subject for laughter, and the most horribly blasphemous expressions were used with respect to his penitence. It might have been a crowd of citizenesses during the French Revolution. There was an utter callousness, a cold-blooded nonchalance, and a frequency of oaths which made the crowd almost terrible as well as repulsive. There seemed to be not an atom of feeling amongst the lot. Everyone had something to say. There was a continual hum of conversation, but amongst the babel of words, it was impossible to detect one which breathed kindly feeling, regret, or even seriousness. But it is now 5 minutes to 8, and the first sign comes from the inside of the jail upon the high tower. A stalwart warder appears at length, the prison clock strikes the hour, the signal is given, and in another moment, the black signal of death flutters in the clear fresh breeze. A kind of shudder is observable among the people as the flag ascends, but the feeling soon passes away, and from a large number of the assembled crowd rises a fiendish and inhuman shout. The cry for blood was satisfied. A stampede commenced immediately, and the hundreds of people streamed back into Leeds. A few still lingered about the place, gazing fitfully at the black signal, and talking together in knots of the strange and adventurous career which had just closed so ignominiously. The inquest and verdict. At 11 on the fatal morning, the inquest on the body was held in the committee room at the jail before Mr. J. Roman 100 Malcolm, the borough coroner. The verdict of the jury certified that the identity of the deceased as Charles Peace was proved, and that the sentence of death passed upon him had been carried out. Peace's features were but little changed, and excepting the usual swollen appearance of the face and neck, always observable in those hung, there was nothing to prevent anyone who had known him alive from identifying the remains as those of the convict. The interment. The remains were subsequently taken to the murderer's graveyard, which is inside the walls, and were there unceremoniously interred. Rude stones mark the place of burial of previous victims of the law's highest penalty, and a headstone has been placed over Peace's grave similar to that of the others, on which are cut his initials and the date of his death. Peace and his revolvers. The statement made by Mr. Woodward, the London gunsmith, to the effect that the manufacture of bullets like those found in the bodies of the policeman Cock and Mr. Dyson had been discontinued for more than 5 years, led to the inquiry where Peace could have obtained the bullets that he used. It appears that Peace stole the revolver from the house of a gentleman at Manchester in the early part of 1876, and with the revolver which was in a case, he also stole a box of Eli's 442 Pinfair cartridges. The box was full, and contained probably 100 cartridges, several of which Peace used. When the family at Peckham heard that Peace had been arrested at Blackheath, Mrs. Peace and Mrs. Thompson each packed up a large box of articles, and left the one for Nottingham and the other for Sheffield. Mrs. Thompson put into her box Peace's other 3 revolvers together with all the ammunition there was in the house, including the remainder of the box of Pinfair cartridges. A short time after Mrs. Peace asked Mrs. Thompson what she had done with the revolvers and ammunition, and she replied that being afraid to retain them in her possession, she had packed all in a basket, and her sister had sunk them in the canal at Nottingham. There is no reason to suppose, if properly gone about, that the sister would refuse to point out the spot where she put the basket, if that could be fished up from the bottom of the canal. And the Pinfair cartridges found there would be further confirmation of the truth of Peace's confession that he shot policeman Cook. Peace's last will and testament. Some very erroneous statements have been made not only as to the value of the property that was at Peace's disposal, but also as to the manner in which he had disposed of it. At one of the interviews Peace had with his wife and family, he signed a deed of gift in which he made over to them all he possessed. They went to London in the hope of being able to obtain the property stated to belong to Peace, but not being successful, he had a will drawn up by Messrs. Warren and Ford of Leeds, in which he left all he possessed to Willie Ward and his daughter Mrs. Bolsover. The following is the full text of the will. I, Charles Peace, at present lodged in Armley Jail in the county of York, under sentence of death, do hereby revoke all wills, codicils, and other testamentary dispositions heretofore made by me, and declare this alone to be my last will and testament. I give, devise, and bequeath all my real estate, and all my money securities for money, furniture, goods, chattels, and all other personal estate, of which I shall die possessed, or over which I shall at my death have power to dispose, by this my will, unto William Ward of Darnall, grocer's assistant, and Jane Ann Bolsover of Darnall, aforesaid, in equal shares as tenants in common, the share of the said Jane Ann Bolsover, to be for her sole and separate use, and free from the control and debts of her present or any future husband. And I appoint the said William Ward and Jane Ann Bolsover executor and executrix of this, my will, in witness, whereof I have hereunto set my hand this 24th day of February, 1879. The will is signed by Charles Peace, and witnessed by Osmond Cookson Roman, 1000A, chaplain of Her Majesty's Prison, Leeds, and William Warren, solicitor, Leeds. According to an old law, the property of a felon became forfeit to the Crown, and in consequence, rich men who entered upon desperate enterprises, often contrived by deed or gift, and other means to outwit the avarice of the monarchy. Practically, the law on this subject has long been obsolete, and hence we had the spectacle of a condemned murderer putting his house in order, and making his will as if he were a respectable citizen, dying in the odor of sanctity. Mr. Charles Peace, temporarily residing in Her Majesty's jail at Armley, had, with the commendable spirit of orderliness, which were found to have marked all the known events of a singularly active and varied life, prepared his last will and testament, a document duly signed and attested by the governor of Armley Jail. The contents of Mr. Peace's will had remained unknown until the testator left a world, which only his most ardent admirers could contend that he adorned. However, there was not long to wait before the public learned the full particulars of the manner in which Mr. Peace disposed of what, if he had been half as careful as he was enterprising, might be a considerable personal estate. The chest full of jewelry and silver plate, reported to have been discovered buried in the railway embankment at Nunhead, was not included in the convict's belongings for the simple reason that the chest and its contents never had any existence outside the imagination of the pennyliner who invented the story. Besides the duly attested will, Mr. Peace consigned to his wife a deed of gift by which he disposed of certain effects in her favor, with the exception of a watch and his patent for raising sunken ships. Both watch and patent were conferred upon his stepson Willie Ward in the hope that he would make some use of the latter, so far as can be made out of the conflicting statements on all subjects appertaining to the interesting criminal. A half share in the patent for raising sunken ships belonged to Mr. Brion the geographer. Such a slight matter of detail would not, however, affect a gentleman of Mr. Peace's proclivities in disposing by gift or otherwise of the entire property. A somewhat clouded comprehension of meum and tuum throughout marked his checkered career, provided the Crown were willing to permit Mr. Peace the disposition of what he was pleased to call his property. Surely the government would feel some scruples in taking probate duty upon the results of crimes. If Mr. Peace's personalty were in cash, it would nothing but fair to opine that this particular money was essentially filthy lucre, with a genesis from the hands of a burglar through those of offense, and thence by the melting pot back again to the possession of the criminal. Possibly, the will itself might be in some persons' opinion a bogus instrument, dealing with a fabulous estate, for it would seem if Mr. Peace were possessed of means, he would have taken care for a satisfactory and complete defense assuming for the sake of argument that property belonging be the murderer had been hidden away somewhere to be forthcoming after his execution, his heirs, executors, and assigns ought not to object to the 100 reward for his apprehension claimed by his darling Sue being paid out of his personalty. It would under the circumstances have been a hardship, indeed, if the country were saddled with the task of enriching such a creature as Mrs. Thompson. Chapter Roman 173, The Executioner's Story. A quiet chat with Marwood. Shortly after the execution of Charles Peace, the following interview took place between a journalist and Marwood. The Irish call me the Prince of Executioners, a gentleman of medium height, with a ruddy face puckered in humorous wrinkles, and with bright eyes, shining with a merry light, utters these words to me in a voice sweet, and low almost gentle as a woman's. It is Marwood the executioner. He has just washed his hands of Peace's death, and now sits opposite me in the cozy drawing-room of a gentleman's villa, not far away from Armley Jail. As he entered the room in his black suit of clerical cut, I had an idea that he dropped a carpet-bag in the passagia bag, containing the rope and straps by the aid of which he had taken the life of a fellow being an hour ago. But he advanced towards me in such a pleasant way, and bowed so politely that my dread soon vanished, and in a few minutes we were in the midst of a quiet chat on the subject of Peace's execution. Without, the snow fell thickly, and a piercing wind swept round the house with an angry stormy sound, but within the curtains were drawn, a bright fire sent its glow throughout the room and then gleamed on Marwood's face, making it look quite benevolent. Seated by the fireside conversing earnestly, we did not notice that the gentleman whose guest he was had tired of knocking, and entered the room to welcome his old friend. Seeing him, Marwood immediately rose from the armchair in which he had been seated, and bowing said, "My kind regards, I pray that we may have happy lives, and that our work will be well done on earth." A rosy-cheeked chubby-faced boy toddled into the room as he was speaking, and seeing the little fellow, Marwood patted him on the head kindly, and with a smile on his face, said, "I hope you will make a very good man." A kind-hearted man enough despite his profession, the executioner had promised me a private interview, and as soon as we were alone again, he referred to the great skill he had attained in the science of hanging, and told me how Peace met his death. A firmer step never walked to the scaffold, he said. I admired his bravery. He met his fate like a man, he acknowledged his guilt, and his hope in God with regard to his future was very good. But I asked, don't you think he feared death? No, replied Marwood, during the 7 years I have officiated as executioner, I never met a man who faced death with greater calmness. You mean to say, then, that he met his fate without a tremor? Yes, responded the executioner. It's true he shivered a bit, but not through fear. It was a bitter winter's morning, and he complained of the cold. It is not surprising, I said, that a man like Peace, who has been face to face with danger, so often should endeavor to die without betraying any weakness or timidity. The bravery was an outcome of his nature, replied Marwood. He was ignorant alike of weakness and timidity. I will prove it to you. He had been suffering from a bad cough for some days the night before his execution. He said to one of his warders, I wonder whether Mr. Marwood can cure this bad cough of mine. The warder replied, I have no doubt he could, and I can tell you that a man who jokes about getting hanged to cure a cough is no coward. Do you think he suffered much? I asked. Not in the least. He was dead instantly, but perhaps I had better tell you what occurred just before the execution. It is a most curious thing, he had got hold of the idea that I should terribly punish him at the scaffold, and he repeatedly asked the chief warder to be sure and tell me that he wished for an interview about a quarter of an hour before he was led out to die. Accordingly, at 10 minutes to 8 o'clock, I went to the condemned cell, which stands about in the center of the jail, some 100 yards from the place where the scaffold was erected. Peace was seated. He was in his convict dress, and there were several officials attending upon him. The bandage had been removed from his head, and he did not wear spectacles. He was neither weak nor prostrate, but sat upright on his chair, as if he had never known a moment's illness. When I appeared in the doorway, he seemed pleased, and holding out his hand, said, I am glad to see you, Mr. Marwood. I wish to have a word with you. I do hope you will not punish me. I hope you will do your work quickly. You shall not suffer pain from my hand, I replied, and then Peace, grasping my arm, said, God bless you. I hope to meet you all in heaven. I am thankful to say my sins are all forgiven. It was now time to pinion him, continued the executioner. He stood up at my request, but did not really need the support of the two warders by his side. He was not at all nervous and quietly submitted to my operation's pinioning, is a very ingenious process. I run a main strap round the body, and connected with it are two other straps, which take the small of the arm so that the elbows are fastened close to the body, and the hands are free. Peace complained, saying the straps fit very tight. I replied it is better so it will prevent you from suffering. He made no further objection, and taking hold of the main strap, so as to keep my hand on him, we started for the scaffold. The governor and the undersheriff went first, then came the chaplain, and I followed with the condemned man, two warders, attending him one on each side. They grasped him by the arms, but did not support him. He was bareheaded, his face was pale, but pinched with cold rather than fear. As he arrived near the scaffold, he gave a very wistful look at my arrangements. They were all right, and seemed to satisfy him, for he made no remark. He went up the steps leading to the drop with a firm tread, whilst the chaplain read the burial service. I brought him to a proper stand under the crossbar and then strapped his legs. When that was done, he wished to say something to the reporters, and made a beautiful speech. Such a speech has never come from a condemned man I have executed. It was really a good speech. When he had finished it, he asked for a drink, but you know that was unreasonable, and it could not be admitted, for the time fixed for the execution had fully expired. So I placed the cap over his face, and adjusted the rope. When he said, I say the rope fits very tight, I replied, never mind, it's all for the best, hold up your chin. And he did so immediately, so that I could properly fix the rope. Goodbye, all, God bless you, he kept repeating, as I went towards the lever. At this time, he did not require anyone to support him, but I told one of the warders to take hold of the back strap. Whilst he stood in this manner on the drop with the noose around his neck, I pushed the lever forward. It withdrew the bolt from the swinging doors, and Peace's body fell through the aperture beneath the platform. The drop was exactly 9 feet 4 inches. Peace was dead in a moment. He never moved a finger or a muscle after he fell, so I carried out my promise to do it well and quickly. I must admit that I was rather astonished at the matter-of-fact, and yet complacent way in which Marwood described the execution, and modestly referred to his own dexterity. But I was anxious to know by what method he had obtained such success as an executioner, and endeavored to glean from him the mysteries of his art. The explanation is explicit, but rather embarrassing. The old system on which Calcraft rested his faith was, he told me, the system of strangulation, which frequently resulted in great suffering, especially when the short drop did not kill the man and the executioner had to pull at his legs until the miserable being was lifeless. But my process is humane, says Marwood, for it entails no suffering. Whatever my principles are, rapidity and dislocation. When the neck is dislocated, the man does not suffer at all. At least that is my opinion. I have no doubt that if you examine Peace you would find the spinal cord severed. It is done in this way. I attach the rope to the crossbar. The noose at the opposite end is formed by a brass ring woven in the rope, and this is placed on the left side of the neck towards the chin. Anxious to give me a correct idea of his process, he placed his finger on my own neck to signify the exact locality, and I began to grow nervous, and to wonder whether I had committed some diabolical murder or other, and was about to suffer for my sin. I suddenly became very wise as to the adjustment of the noose, and told Marwood that I had a very vivid idea of the perfection of the arrangement, with the intention of leading him to speak on some topic, not quite so personal, but he said he had made this subject the study of his life, and he continued to point out the merits of the long drop compared with the short drop, and to speak earnestly of the advantages derived from the alteration. I am not very easily frightened, but I found this dissertation on the science of hanging oppress me. I had a desire to get outside the house, to get into a freer atmosphere. I could almost imagine that if I didn't, and that speedily, I should not escape the long drop myself. Still, there was nothing terrible about Mr. Marwood, as he reclined in his easy chair, and spoke in his soft, pleasant tones of the strange experiences he had gone through. I am doing God's work, he said, according to the divine command, and the law of the British Crown. I do it simply as a matter of duty, and as a Christian, and I think no more of it than I do of chatting to you now. Such is the affable man who executed Peace, conscious that he is doing his duty. The character of the profession he follows has no influence upon him, and he claims to be a benefactor to society. I asked him what induced him to adopt such a mode of gaining his livelihood, and he replied, "Oh, when I heard the old gentleman Calcraft was breaking down, and I saw the accounts of his bungling work, I thought, if I could carry out the sentence of the law more mercifully, it would be a service to the public." I always had a love of anatomy, and even when a boy was greatly interested in executions, but it is a most singular fact that I never saw an execution until I myself became an executioner. I do my duty with a kind hand, and with firmness, and believe I really render a benefit to society. I have been successful in every engagement, and I am respected wherever I go. I have told you that in Ireland I am known as the Prince of Executioners. In Scotland I have received the kindest treatment, and if I were really a prince, I could not be better served. In the past 7 years more than 100 persons have died at my hand, but I cannot tell you the exact number, as I do not now keep a record. Are you ever haunted by the features of those you have executed? I asked in desperation, thinking that perhaps I might surprise him into some expression of feeling. "Bless your life, no," he said, smiling. "I sleep as soundly as a child, and am never disturbed by phantoms. Where there is guilt, there is bad sleeping. But I am not disturbed in the least, for I am conscious that I try to live a blameless life. The other night I slept in the warder's apartments in Armley Jail peacefully and undisturbed, although I had superintended the erection of the scaffold, and knew I had to execute peace in the morning. It is a matter of duty with me entirely." "Have all the criminals who have received your attentions acted courageously on the scaffold?" "Well," Marwood replied, taking them all together, "they are a brave lot. The worst job I ever had was with a Spaniard, a sailor at Usk in Monmouth. He had murdered a man, his wife, and 3 children, and then set the house on fire. He was sentenced to death, and when he saw me enter the cell with the straps he fainted, and was saved from falling by 2 warders. I put the straps upon him, and said in an authoritative voice, 'Stand up, sir, it was only a sham faint.' I told him I would not have such nonsense, and he stood up immediately. With this lesson he walked out, and was hanged quietly. Peace, however, gave me no trouble of this kind, but met his fate like a man." I now ventured to ask the executioner if he was not looked upon with some degree of loathing when he became the successor of Calcraft, and he freely admitted that such was the case. "I was frequently jeered at," he said at first, "but I put it down to people's ignorance, and now I am received with the greatest kindness wherever my services are needed." "How does it affect you in your own town?" was the last question I put to Mr. Marwood. "Oh," he replied, "at Horncastle I was looked upon as one of the first men in the place. I was treated well by one and all, detesting idleness. I passed my vacant time in business, and worked in my shoe shop near the church day after day, until such time as I was required elsewhere. It would have been better for those I executed if they had preferred industry to idleness." I had passed nearly 2 hours in the society of the hangman. When our quiet chat was over, thanked him for his kindness, and bade him adieu. As I left the room he shook me heartily by the hand, then said, "Goodbye, God bless you," and bowed me out of the villa with that polished courtesy which is always so becoming in a crown official. Chapter Roman 174, Capital Punishment, Merciful and Merciless Modes in Different Ages. In this chapter, we propose giving a short review of the methods by which obnoxious criminals have been, at various times, among various peoples, invited to shuffle off this mortal coil. Capital punishment, like Cleopatra's charms, has been of infinite variety, however, as a rule being simply among the most horrible possible methods. No records remain to tell how the contemporaries of the Saurians and the Megatherium, the ingenious dwellers in caves and warriors of the flint, age disposed of their malefactors, but the fullest accounts have been preserved of the proceedings of our more modern ancestors since the days of Adam in the way of executions. The Jews, who led the bedroll of antique nations, appear to have usually stoned the criminals of their own race, a democratic sort of penalty, where every good citizen had a finger in the pie, and hurled his righteous rock, and even the little Hebrew boys could enjoy the fun of the stoner. To the stoned it must have been something of a lingering torture, requiring much patience to bear for their enemies. They reserved the sharper practice of hewing them in pieces, or they burned them alive, or turned them to agricultural account, and fertilized the sites of their smoking cities by harrowing them in with considerable vehemence. The Chinese, another ancient and highly cultured race, have been similarly merciless. It is singular how little difference there has been in this respect of ingenious cruelty between the most cultivated peoples and the wildest savages. Decapitation is the mildest of Chinese extreme penalties, and is usually performed with much skill and sang-froid, by means of a sword, the criminal male and female taking the matter most philosophically, and making no indecorous remonstrances at their summary taking off. There is a tariff too for substitute as a plan, which might commend itself to our wealthier homicides, but our celestial neighbors across the Pacific prefer killing the doomed, by not allowing them to sleep or starving them to death in cages, or straitened limits, in which they are exhibited during the process of skeleton formation, in peripatetic rambles, on the shoulders of the local deputy sheriffs. And chopping them deliberately into fragments at intervals of an hour or so, is much to their taste. There is a cage part of the spolia opima of the First Chinese War among the archives of the Royal Artillery at Madras, India, in which they carried about Colonel Rowlandson. And the London Times had a liberal annual payment on its pension list for the family of Mr. Bowles, a special correspondent, similarly disposed of just before the last Chinese War. The torturing propensities of the pleasing red man, whom Cooper immortalized, and Custer has occasionally assisted to the happy hunting grounds, are too well known to require much notice. The use of fire is a prominent feature in their social circles, complicated with the facetious tomahawk and the insinuating scalping knife, but we know the Modocs, the Sioux, and others like them only too well. The Assyrians, Medes, and Persians, ancient Egyptians, and other Orientals seem to have employed similar agencies to their Israelitish neighbors for lopping off the rotten branches of their family trees. The processes are faithfully depicted and chiseled on the walls of Thebes, Persepolis, and Nineveh. The Greeks were somewhat tender-hearted in some cases. For instance, they allowed Socrates to poison himself comfortably among his friends. They objected to parricides, however, and for them reserved a punishment adopted from the Egyptians like their alphabet, and naturalized at a later date by the Romans. They confined the too impetuous slayer of his father in a bag with a snake, a monkey, and a cat to keep him company, and then gently dropped the congenial party into the sea. The Romans seem first to have hit on the idea of crucifixion, a singularly torturing refinement of internal, external, and mental pain. It was esteemed an ignoble death, and must have been anguish to a sensitive mind. The cruel nails rending the flesh, barely supporting the weight of the writhing body, must have been severe, while the dreadful thirst of the fevered victim must have been a culminating horror. The state criminals sometimes came floating over the Tarpeian rock and smashed into pulp below. This has been emulated by Theodore of Abyssinia at his mountain fastness of Magdala, and by Tipu Sahib at the Drorg, one of the peaks of the Nilgiri Mountains in southern India, where is a convenient precipice, over 1,000 feet clear of sheer natural wall. The Roman taste for the joys of the circus stimulated their imagination to devise novel torment, and criminals or Christians, or simply prisoners of war, were exposed to combat wild beasts or each other to grace a Roman holiday. They sometimes, however, executed distinguished folks in polite fashion, merely sending a polite message for them to stand not on the order of their going, but go out of the world at their earliest convenience. A good deal of bleeding to death in warm baths and sudden insertion of the bare bodkin resulted. The chivalric Japanese custom of harakiri is a similar concession to the conventionalities of society, and is also eminently useful as a dueling agent, necessitating the absolute retirement of both disturbers of the peace and their friends' serenity. It is hardly necessary to dilate on the ceremonious surroundings of these interesting occasions, when the accomplished gentleman who has offended the laws or has been offended by a friend calls his relatives and acquaintances together, and supported by a second, a veteran in the punctilio of the local code of honor, makes his little speech, drinks his farewell toast, and then proceeds to carve himself in the most approved style, proudly feeling, as he dies, that he has done his duty to his country, his family, and the world at large, and that the gentleman he had the difficulty with cannot survive him. The Druids, like the Huns, the Aztecs, and the Ashantees and Dahomians in the present day, were rather sanguinary. Funerals were fittingly honored by the sacrifice of a proportionate number of slaves and criminals to form a retinue for the worthy departed in the world of spirits. The Druids usually burned a few hundreds in a great wicker image of the human figure. It is recorded that many thousands of men, women, and children with horses, jewels, arms, and domestic necessaries were sacrificed when Attila, the scourge of God, died, and were buried with him in the bed of a river, diverted temporarily from its course for the purpose and similar formalities, are observed in the African kingdoms mentioned on any one event, but repeated annually, as a custom, to keep the manes of the deceased in good humor, by the polite remembrance implied by the observance. But Christian Europe in the Dark Ages could vie with any race or century in the ingenuity and refined cruelty of capital punishment. The preliminary tortures of the rack, the boots, the thumbscrews, the strappado, must have tended to make the recipient of these attentions desirous of death. The noble barons who harried each other and revolted at brief intervals throughout their tumultuous lives, pressed air, earth, fire, and water into their service for the purpose of execution. Men were judicially pressed to death as late as the Titus Oates conspiracy. In the reign of Charles Roman II, they were hanged in chains to starve, they were burned alive, half-hanged, mutilated, and then burned, they were scorched with hot irons, their eyes seared out, their limbs plunged into molten lead or tar. They were spitted like cockchafers on stakes, they were drowned with unmerciful rapidity, or chained to stakes at low water, to be more slowly suffocated by the rising tide. They were broken on the wheel or torn apart by wild horses, while the axe for the noble kept up a perpetual refrain like the ticking of a clock. The Inquisition in the garb, and under the name of religion, invented and applied more exquisite barbarities to drive a man mad first and into a grave afterwards, by the incessant trickling of a single drop of water, was a torment worthy of Satan himself. The thousands burned to death in Spain, France, England, China, India, Germany, attest the gusto with which the reverend brethren of the Holy Office snuffed in the flavor of roasting humanity, and were enraptured with the shrieks of the martyrs, as nowadays we are when Capel or Tamberlik rouses our enthusiasm with the ringing C in alt. In those good old days men were slain for sneezing in improper places, for constructive disrespect, or for stealing a loaf, and the severity remained till within comparatively recent times. Some of the Middle Age methods still survive in Naples. 3 years ago, of 3 women condemned for infanticide, 2 were beheaded. The third, the principal culprit, was macellated or knocked on the head, with a trace like an ox, her abdomen then slashed open, while the executioner executed a pas de fascination on the quivering trunk, spurting the blood out like a fountain. In Spain's Spanish colonies, and the sister republics who once owed allegiance to that haughty country, malefactors are garroted or strangled in an armchair with a steel cravat, which is jammed to the choking point by the dexterous twisting of a screw behind. They also shoot considerably, evincing a peculiar fondness for shooting people in the back with a remarkably bad aim, and then finishing them with a shot in the ear at close quarters or a dagger under the 5th rib. It was in this way they disposed of William Walker, the grade man of destiny, at Truxillo in 1860. The French weakness for the guillotine, an aggravated edition of the domestic bread or meat chopper, has disposed of many multitudes of kings, queens, nobles, ragamuffins, petroluses, and others with businesslike rapidity and cleanliness. The basket, sawdust, and bright lipoless cheese knife employed are familiar and almost inviting in comparison with the gallows adhered to by Anglo-Saxons. Hanging nowadays seems a lost art. The Americans have improved the machinery with patent drops and weights, warranted to jerk up the hanged with satisfactory promptitude. But the education of the hangman has been sadly neglected. The knot is rarely tied with scientific accuracy, or the rope in as good condition as it might be. The consequence is but a small proportion of the sufferers enjoy the sudden death they would prefer if they must die in so hasty a manner, and instead of their necks being broken, they are slowly strangled if the rope does not break and necessitate a repetition of the performance. Physicians and anatomists say this slow strangulation must be exquisitely painful. Humanitarians have accordingly suggested painless extinction. Chloroform, applied long enough, would soothe the slumber to wake no more here below, with absolutely no pain. An overdose of laudanum might be an improvement, as bestowing positive pleasure, before he lapsed into unconsciousness. Both these and other plans are warmly recommended and discussed with some heat by their respective advocates. Some gentlemen have even hinted at the possibility of doing good at the same time, by dissecting the brain of the living, but unconscious subject during the calm retreat from the sins and follies of his life. Another method of painless extinction is by blowing the patient from a gun. This was invented by the Mohammedans of India, was employed by the British during the Mutiny of 1857, and is still in favor with the Amir of Afghanistan. It has one great advantage as a preventive of crime in its application to Hindus, as they believe when a man's body is split into filaments, as it must be by such a process, that his chances of future existence are very slim. Their ideas of resurrection are peculiar and Pythagorean, but they object to this total obliteration, and accordingly dread the blowing from gun procedure above all other penalties. Physically, it cannot hurt, however. The conclusion and distribution of the fragments are so sudden and complete that pain must be entirely wanting, as an element destroying a hanged Brahmin's body with quicklime is also objectionable to Hindus on account of similar doubts as to his future rehabilitation. A Hindu punishment of gradually crushing a criminal under the foot of a trained elephant is repulsive and is discountenanced by the British government. Any Raja who reverts to these ancestral amusements renders his tenure on the throne insecure. It has not been practiced for some years. The guillotine, of which such horrible use was made in the past French Revolution, has been said to be the most merciful mode of putting malefactors to death, but this is by no means certain. Dr. Tuck and some German physicians and surgeons after him held that there does indubitably remain in the brain of a decapitated head some degree unrest of thought, and in the nerves something of sensibility, and the case of Mademoiselle Corday was alleged as proving that doctrine. We abstain from any details of the thousands of murders by the guillotine. At this time, one fact will enable our readers to understand something of its horrors. It was proved on the trial of Fauquier Tinville that 160 persons of all ages and ranks, and of both sexes, were tried and executed on a charge of conspiracy, not merely false, but absurd, visionary, and impossible. 45 of these persons, who were utterly unknown to each other, were tried and condemned within 20 minutes, and executed on the same evening, in almost as short a space. These executions were for many months the amusement, spectacle of the people who wish we could say the populace of Paris. Chairs were stationed round the instrument of death, where women in a station of life, to be able to pay for that amusement, used to have seats, and sit and chat and work, while waiting for the tragedy which they had looked at as a farce. We find in the Review Retrospective a curious letter, incidentally descriptive of this elegant scene of Parisian amusement. The Procureur General Ardera to Citizen Gaiden. 13th May 1793. I enclose, Citizen, the copy of a letter from Citizen Chaumet, Solicitor to the Commune of Paris, by which you will perceive that complaints are made, that after these public executions the blood of the criminals remains in pools upon the place, and that dogs come to drink it, and that crowds of men feed their eyes with this spectacle, which naturally instigates their hearts to ferocity and blood. I request you therefore to take the earliest and most convenient measures to remove from the eyes of men a sight so afflicting to humanity. Our readers will observe the tender regret not that all this blood was shed, but that it was not wiped up, and they will be startled when they recollect that at the date of this letter not above a dozen persons had been yet executed there, but that within 1 year the blood of 1,000 victims had saturated the same small spot of ground. In one of the foolish modern antique processions of the Convention, the whole cortege was delayed and thrown into confusion, because the cattle that were drawing some of their theatrical machines could neither be induced nor forced to traverse this blood-tainted place. This Chaumet was one of the most impious and sanguinary of the whole tribe, and we could almost believe that he envied the dogs the blood they drank. He it was that bullied the wretched idiot Gobel, revolutionary Archbishop of Paris, to come to the bar of the Convention, to abjure Christianity, and proclaim himself an impostor at the head of a procession, in which asses were insultingly decorated with the sacred emblems of religion. Chaumet himself, it was who introduced to the Convention a prostitute in the character of the goddess of reason. Robespierre sent this whole clique to the guillotine, and on the 13th of April 1794, Chaumet's own blood flowed to increase the horrors of which he had complained. The guillotine remained in permanence in the Place de la Révolution till the 8th of June 1794, when the inhabitants of the streets through which the batches fournies, as they were called, of sufferers used to pass, became at last tired of the agreeable sight, and solicited its removal. Robespierre seems at this time to have adopted a new policy, to have formed some design of founding a dictatorial authority in his own person on the basis of religion and morals. On the 7th June, he made his famous report acknowledging l'être suprême, and appointed the 20th June for the great fete in the gardens of the Tuileries, which was to celebrate this recognition. Of this ceremony Robespierre was to be the Pontifex Maximus, and it can hardly be doubted that it was to remove the odious machines from the immediate scene of his glorification, that it was the day after the decree, and 10 days before the celebration removed, to the place St. Anton in front of the ruins of the Bastille. But that a day might not be lost, it was removed on a decade, the Republican Sabbath. No 100. In the 49 days in which it is said to have stood at the Barrière du Trône, it dispatched 1270 persons of both sexes, and of all ages and ranks, and it became necessary to build a kind of sangueduct to carry off the streams of blood. And on the very last day when the tyrant had already fallen, and that the smallest interruption would have sufficed to have stopped the fatal procession, 49 persons passed almost unguarded through the stupefied streets to the place of execution. And here we have the last occasion to mention Sanson, and it is to his credit, as indeed all the personal details related of him seem to be on the 9th Thermidor. There was about 3:30 in the afternoon, just as this last batch of victims was about to leave the conciergerie, a considerable commotion in the town caused by the revolt against Robespierre. At that moment Fauquier, on his way to dine with a neighbor, passed through the court, where the prisoners were ascending the fatal carts. Sanson, whose duty it was to conduct the prisoners to execution, ventured to stop the public accuser to represent to him that there were some rumors of a commotion, and to suggest whether it would not be prudent to postpone the execution till at least the next morning. Fauquier roughly replied that the law must take its course. He went to dinner, and the 49 victims went to the scaffold, whither in due time he followed them. After the accession of Louis Philippe, for whom the guillotine must have been an object of the most painful contemplation, sentences of death were also very rare, and certainly never executed where there was any possible room for mercy. The executions, too, when forced upon him, took place at early hours, and in remote and uncertain places, and every humane art was used to cover the operations of the fatal instrument with a modest veil, not only from motives of general decency and humanity, but also no doubt from national pride and personal sensibility. What Frenchman would not wish that the name and memory of the guillotine could be blotted from the history of mankind? The word guillotine, says the author of Les Festes de l'Anarchie, should be effaced from the language, but the revolutionary horrors, which France is naturally so anxious to forget, it the more behoves us, and the rest of Europe, to remember and meditate. Such massacres as we have been describing will probably never be repeated. They will no doubt stand unparalleled in the future, as they do in the former annals of the world. But they should never be forgotten, as an example of the incalculable excesses of popular insanity. The invention of this instrument of death, the guillotine, is thus described by a graphic writer. Joseph Ignace Guillotin lived to deplore his own ingenuity in inventing or suggesting a machine, which, besides being effective for the immediate purpose intended, was the result of a really kind feeling. The stern irony of fate occasionally rewards inventors in this way. Born in 1738, Guillotin received a medical training. He became a physician of much repute, and was chosen professor in one of the French universities in 1789. When France was beginning to feel the first throes of the Revolution, Guillotin was elected member of the National Assembly, and took his seat among the liberals or reformers. He proposed a resolution declaratory that capital punishment ought to bear no relation to the rank of the culprit, that when a criminal is condemned to death for any crime, whatever the mode of execution, should be the same whether he were peer or peasant. Until then, nobles and privileged persons, when condemned to death, had the honor of being decapitated either by the axe or by the sword, whereas the common people were left to the tender mercies of a hempen rope. Dr. Guillotin, at the same time, proposed a second resolution. He wished to save the unhappy being from the additional punishment existing from the uncertainty, nervousness, or clumsiness of the executioner, whether axeman or swordsman. He cited historical incidents in which 2, 3, or even more cuts were given by the axe or the sword before the head of the miserable sufferer was finally severed from the body. He proposed to do away alike with the gibbet, the sword, and the axe, and to substitute a decapitating machine in which a sharp, heavy knife should descend on the neck of the condemned. Feeling assured that bodily pain could not be felt during this brief operation, he was quite carried away by his subject, and said enthusiastically, I could cut off your head with my machine in the twinkling of an eye without your suffering the smallest pain. Poor Dr. Guillotin had to bear the shafts of ridicule, always a terrible weapon to a Frenchman. Many of the members of the assembly smiled at his ardent words, and the royalists out of doors made rare fun of him. One of their journals gave a song on the inimitable machine of Dr. Guillotin, for chopping off heads called after his name the guillotine. Poor Dr. Guillotin had to bear the shafts of ridicule, always a terrible weapon to a Frenchman. Many of the members of the assembly smiled at his ardent words, and the royalists out of doors made rare fun of him. One of their journals gave a song on the inimitable machine of Dr. Guillotin, for chopping off heads called after his name. This name, started in this bantering way, has clung to the machine from that day, till now. The doctor protested against the designation. But in vain. He did not even invent the machine, he merely pointed out that the chopping action could easily be produced by a sharp, heavy blade, descending from an upright frame. The National Assembly, on receiving Dr. Guillotin's two propositions at once, adopted the first of them by decreeing equality of punishment for all ranks of society, but left the mode of execution for further consideration. It was not till nearly 2 years afterwards that, on the motion of Roman 2000 Lepelletier and St. Fargen, a decree was issued declaring that the mode of capital punishment should be by decapitation. Even then, the merits and demerits of the axe, the sword, and the falling knife were left in abeyance. In March 1792, the Assembly sought the advice of Dr. Anton Louis, a celebrated surgeon and secretary of the Paris College of Surgeons. He explained scientifically how far the various decapitating instruments acted like knives and how far like scissors, and expressed himself decidedly in favor of a chopping machine. He showed that the idea of such a machine was by no means a new one. An Italian book by Achille Bacchi, dated 1555, gives an engraving of an Italian nobleman being beheaded. A heavy blade, suspended by cords from a crossbar at the top of a frame, is represented as falling on the neck of the victim. In 1632, some such apparatus was employed in Languedoc for decapitating Duke Henry de Montmorency. It was also ascertained that Scotland in the north and Persia in the east had employed machines bearing a resemblance to this. Among the strange scenes of the French Revolutionary days, not the least strange was that of the National Assembly listening gravely to the details given on these matters. Dr. Louis conferred with Dr. Guillotin, and also with the famous executioner Sanson, specially urged that if all executions henceforth were to be by beheading, a machine would be greatly needed, as he distrusted his own power of using the sword or the axe so frequently and so accurately as would be necessary. After hearing all the explanations and suggestions, the Assembly passed a decree for the use of a decapitating machine in substitution of the halter, the axe, the sword, and the various instruments of torture such as the rack. One Schmidt, a German musical instrument maker residing at Paris, was taken into council, and he guillotined Louis and Sanson, settled among them the details of the machine. Nay, there was even a fifth adviser, the king, always fond of lock-making and amateur engineering, requested to have the designs shown to him, and he suggested an improvement which was practically adopted. A sum of 5,500 francs was paid for the machine constructed for the National Assembly by Gaydon, the carpenter. An attempt was made to give the name of Louiset or Louison to it, in honor of the learned doctor. But the name guillotine had been current in the public mind for 2 or 3 years, and nothing could supplant it, although Dr. Guillotin certainly never sought to have his memory thus perpetuated. The apparatus was first tried in decapitating the dead bodies of 3 men and some live animals at the prison of the Bicêtre. Dr. Louis, after seeing the efficacy of the invention tested in this way, died just before the terrible days of the Revolution came on, and was therefore denied the pleasure, or spared the pain, whichever it might be, of seeing the guillotine employed as the most dreaded of political instruments. The first victim was an ordinary criminal and highwayman named Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, who was guillotined on the 25th of April 1792. The Chronique de Paris, in its next day's issue, stated that the novelty in this mode of execution caused a considerable augmentation in the number of persons who usually witness such scenes. The machine is with good reason preferred to other modes of putting to death one human being, is not directly employed in decapitating another, and the promptness with which the operation takes place is more consistent with the spirit of the law, which is often severe, but should never be cruel. The first political guillotining took place 4 months later, when Louis-David Collinat d'Agremont was executed by torchlight for the crime of having been among the enemies of the people on the 10th of August, the day on which the people broke into the Tuileries, expelled the royal family, and filled the palace and its surroundings with blood. The National Assembly was succeeded by the National Convention, and by this convention was founded the Revolutionary Tribunal in April 1793. Then, indeed, commenced the fearful period, always since recorded in history, as the Reign of Terror, which lasted until July 1794. How many unhappy persons were guillotined during these 15 months is not accurately known. But in the final 6 weeks preceding the fall of Robespierre, more than 1,100 heads rolled in the dust of Paris alone. Whether Roman 1000 Guillotin had the heart to join in these discussions, we do not know. Continued his practice as a physician, and was much respected. A popular notion prevails that he himself fell a victim to the machine, which he had suggested, nay, that he was its first victim. Such was not the case. He was in prison as a suspect during the later days of the Terror. But the fall of Robespierre occurred just in the nick of time, and Roman 1000 Guillotin survived to the days of the Consulate and the Empire. He wrote a portion of autobiography, marked by the omission of all notice of his much-regretted suggestion of a beheading machine. The indifference to death, induced by an almost daily familiarity with descriptions and spectacles relating to it, showed itself in ways which we in our quiet country and quiet times can hardly regard as credible. During the Terror, the guillotining of several persons every day, sometimes many scores a day, became so much a matter of course as to be treated by the Parisians as an ordinary element in city business. In the prison, to play at guillotine was a favorite amusement among the prisoners, and many jokes were manufactured about the national razor. Some of the shopkeepers went so far as to display earrings shaped like little guillotines 2 years before the fall of Robespierre, when violence had begun, but had not yet assumed its more fearful aspect. Aristocratic or royalist families kept a good deal within doors in their Parisian mansions, and sometimes amused themselves in a strangely morbid way. Dolls or puppets were provided with features resembling those of the chief popular leaders. After dinner, during dessert, a small mahogany guillotine was introduced and wheeled along the table from guest to guest one by one. The puppets were placed under the knife, and their heads chopped off. Inside the trunk or body of the puppet was a liquid vinous, and fragrant enough to be tasteful to the palate, but blood-red. This flowed out over the table, and the guests, including ladies, dipped their handkerchiefs into it and applied it to their lips. In all probability, this strange game was played but seldom, but opposition journalists magnified it into a regular habit of less aristocrats. They do these things differently in France, even as regards hanging and head chopping, to what we do in England, observes a writer, while noticing the well-known work entitled The Memoirs of the Sansons. There the office of public executioner is hereditary, and has been held by one of the same family from 1681 down to 1867. Here, when Mr. Calcraft resigned his post, Mr. Marwood, a person in no way connected or related with his predecessor, succeeded him. In this instance, merit alone and not hereditary right or title, we presume, assured to the present hangman his high office. Roman 1000 Sanson, whose memoirs are here translated from the French, is the last of his line. As the translator informs us, he was the lineal descendant of a race of headsmen, through whose hands every state victim, as well as every common criminal, had passed during 2 centuries. They had hung, beheaded, guillotined, quartered, and tortured from father to son without interruption. The grandfather of the author executed King Louis XVI, and his queen, besides a host of nobles and others. He likewise had to carry into execution part of the sentence passed on Madame de la Motte, who had been found guilty of cheating 2 jewelers out of a valuable necklace, on pretense that Queen Marie Antoinette had commissioned Cardinal de Rohan to purchase it for her. She was sentenced to be whipped, branded, and imprisoned for life. Roman 1000 Sanson thus describes how his grandfather performed the duties imposed on him. Woman whippings. Madame de la Motte shuddered. She clenched her hands, looked down, and then, raising her head very well, she said the 2 assistants, who had at first tried to secure her, came forward, but she motioned them away and advanced before them. When the procession reached the hall where a parliamentary committee were sitting, the clerk read out the judgment, at the very first which proclaimed her guilt. The strongest emotion appeared on Madame de la Motte's face. Her eyes rolled in their sockets, she bit her lips, and the hitherto pretty face now seemed to be the mask of fury. Charles Henry foresaw a storm and approached her, and it was well that he did so, for, as the clerk came to the penalties, the unhappy woman's rage burst out with extraordinary violence. She fell backwards so suddenly that her head must have been fractured on the stones, had not my grandfather caught her in his arms. Madame de la Motte's strength increased as the consciousness of her fate flashed through her mind, and a protracted struggle ensued between her and the assistants who attempted to pinion her. She was at length carried down to the court. The scaffold was erected opposite the gate which had been left open, but it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and only a limited number of persons were looking on. She was stretched on the platform and received 12 stripes. She never ceased shrieking while the punishment was being inflicted. She invoked vengeance on the head of Cardinal de Rohan, and she added that it was her own fault that she had suffered the disgrace which had been inflicted on her, since, had she said but one word, she would have been hanged instead of having been flogged. The second part of the sentence had no doubt escaped her, for when she was seated on the platform she remained motionless, as if completely subdued and powerless. Charles Henry Sanson thought the moment was well chosen for the completion of the penalty. Her dress had been torn and her shoulders were bare, and he took an iron from the grate and applied it to her skin. Madame de la Motte uttered a wild shriek, and writhing in the grasp of one of the assistants who were holding her, she bit his hand with such fury that she took a piece of flesh off. She struggled again, and it was with the greatest difficulty that the iron could be applied to the other shoulder. Justice was now satisfied. Madame de la Motte was put into a fly and taken to the salpêtrière. As she was alighting, she tried to run under the wheels, and a few moments afterwards, she thrust the sheet of her bed into her throat in a frenzied attempt to choke herself. Her imprisonment lasted for months. An amateur headsman. On August 20, 1792, the Tuileries were invaded, and the king incarcerated in the Temple. A revolutionary tribunal was instituted. This tribunal, although it numbered men like Fouquier Tinville, used the guillotine with comparative moderation. It applied severe laws with severity, but it acted with justice and respected the forms of law. It had chiefly to deal with common malefactors. From 1771 to 1792, the number of raids on persons and property considerably increased. Paper money, which was of recent creation, excited the cupidity of forgers. During a period of 7 months, 15 forgers were executed on the Place de Grève. On August 19, 1792, one Collat was condemned to death for forgery, and the guillotine was erected on the usual spot selected for executions. The place was as usual well attended, as the cart in which were Charles Henry Sanson and the culprit drove up. A tremendous clamor greeted their appearance, and my grandfather distinguished a cry of "To the carousel." The horse continued to advance, but a man seized the bridle and asked the driver why he did not obey the popular order. Charles Henry Sanson interposed, but the man declared that the will of the commune was that the guillotine should henceforth be erected opposite the palace of the late king, and that he must immediately transfer his tools there. My grandfather replied that his duty was to carry out the orders which were transmitted to him, and not to meet the wishes of the magistrates before they were expressed. But the clamor became more vociferous, and the horse's head was turned in the direction of the Tuileries. Charles Henry Sanson's position was very perplexing. He asked, and at length obtained leave to drive up to the Hôtel de Ville to ask for instructions. After some hesitation, the procureur of the commune authorized my grandfather to act according to the wishes of the mob. The scaffold was taken down and transferred to the Place du Carrousel, and the cart repaired thither escorted by the crowd. But a considerable time elapsed before the guillotine could be erected again, and the culprit, who had hitherto been calm, began to struggle violently. As the carpenters had gone away, the people helped my grandfather to reconstruct the instrument of death. This reconstruction, however, progressed so slowly that night came on before it was finished, and my grandfather, apprehending desperate resistance on the part of the doomed man, requested some of those who worked around him to go to the commune and ask for an adjournment of the execution. The request was received with jeers of anger and derision, and the public indignation became ominously threatening. A beardless young man who wore the red cap came forward shrieking that my grandfather was a traitor, and that he should taste of the guillotine himself, unless he operated without more ado. Charles Henry retorted with some warmth that he could not execute the culprit without special assistance. "Your assistants are drunk," exclaimed the young man. "You can find as much help as you require here. The blood of aristocrats cement the happiness of the nation, and there is not one man in the crowd who is not ready to lend you a hand." A general cry of assent followed these words, but the circle around the scaffold became wider, and it appeared obvious that few were prepared to stand by their word. My grandfather, perceiving this, had hastened to prevent the first speaker from retreating by accepting his offer. The culprit was led to the steps of the scaffold, which he refused to mount, and Charles Henry was obliged to take him in his arms and carry him up the platform. When the unfortunate man saw the dark outline of the machine, his resistance became most desperate, and he shrieked for mercy. The crowd was now silent. The improvised executioner did not budge, but he was very pale. At last, after a final struggle, the culprit was strapped to the plank, but his contortions were so violent that an assistant had to sit upon him. Charles Henry Sanson now told the young man that he could not furnish a better proof of his patriotism than by taking a leading part in the execution, and he put in his hand the rope which communicated with the knife. At his bidding, the young man gave a tug. The knife fell, and the head rolled in the basket. This was not all. It was customary to show the head to the multitude after the decapitation, and loud cries reminded my grandfather of the custom. He explained to the young man what he was to do, at the same time proposing himself to do the horrible duty. But his substitute refused. He took the head by the hair and advanced to the edge of the scaffold. But as he was raising his arm to show the bloody trophy, he staggered and fell back. Charles Henry Sanson came to his assistance, thinking that he was fainting, but he discovered that he was dead. Violent emotion had brought on an apoplectic fit, which killed him instantaneously. Notwithstanding all that had been said upon the efficacy of the guillotine, we much question its being a more merciful mode of death than Mr. Marwood's long drop, as it is termed, as in many cases death has taken place instantaneously. And as a sequel to this chapter, we subjoin a correct account of the leading phrenological characteristics of the present public executioner. Mr. Max Greger, our local phrenologist, whose description of the casts of the convicts Wardlaw and Dockyard was contributed at the time of the executions, has just added the following analysis of the phrenological characteristics of the dread finisher of the law. General size of head very large. Temperament fibrous nervous. Posterior lobe of the brain small. Anterior lobe of the brain rather large. Portion of the brain above cautiousness moderate. Portion of the brain above causality moderate. Circumference at the base 23-34 inches. He is only 5 ft 5 in height. As to age, he will be on the shady side of 50, of remarkable muscular power, which is lost sight of in the face, the narrowness of which compared with the enormous width of head, is strikingly peculiar, the disproportionate size of the latter giving a drooping posture to the body, and seemingly indicating that nature had not intended this personage to hold up his head in society. Though fully developed in the region of the reflective powers, those faculties which judge of the relative size, shape, and design of things, and which constitute the understanding proper, are conspicuous by their absence. Accounted for in him, by want of education and sedentary nature of previous calling shoemaker, there is also a decided want of balancing power, which, taken in conjunction with his possession of large imaginative powers, and stimulated by his active temperament, constitute him an enthusiast, and consequently, he is naturally prone to an erratic course of life, and to be in some respects impracticable and visionary. His large acquisitiveness denotes an inordinate desire to acquire wealth, while his enormous caution will assist in holding fast the same. His large reflective faculties will confer considerable penetration and perception of character, and evince his sense of the ludicrous with humor and mimicry, is large. He, however, must be considered a somewhat grim joker, and he is not at all likely to desire to be made the subject of his own fun. He is ambitious of being thought-knowing and deep. He has an inordinate amount of vanity and self-conceit, must be foremost in his business, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Being highly sensitive to praise, or the admiration of his fellowmen, which however he seldom gets, he is likely to consider the execution of Wainwright a criminal of the first degree, as bringing both himself and his office still more prominently before the public. But this weakness, which is manifested in the manner in which he gloats over the modus operandi of his profession, may in time bring his office more and more into contempt, and thus defeat the very object he is anxious to attain. From the development, we find he is not wanting in energy with considerable shrewdness and tact, and his mechanical and constructive talents would have enabled him to succeed in life either as a manufacturer, a machinist, or an agriculturist. Marwood's card. The following is a copy of Mr. Marwood's professional card, in the last line of which there will be found a touch of grim and doubtless unconscious humor. William Marwood. Executioner. Church Lane. Horncastle. Lincolnshire, England. All orders promptly executed. Chapter Roman 175. Conclusion. We have seen the last of the miscreant, whose career we have shadowed forth, and our task is all but completed. The celebrated piece says a journalist terminated his disgraceful career on Tuesday morning on the scaffold at Armley Jail, Leeds. He seems to have kept up his pluck and his appetite to the very last, and concluded all by making a pious and edifying speech to the reporters. We should be sorry to criticize too closely a production which was given to the world under circumstances most trying to the nerves of its author. It would be obviously absurd to judge the statement of a man of peace's antecedents by the canons of good taste, and as for the genuineness and sincerity of them, they must be ascertained by a higher tribunal than public opinion. Nevertheless, there is a little too much tendency to glorify a great criminal into a great hero. Peace was well aware of this, and naturally acted consciously or unconsciously upon the assumption. Several millions of people were kept from day to day, in a perfect flutter of excitement, to know all that the convict was saying, doing, writing, and almost thinking. Even the composition of his breakfasts, and the way in which he enjoyed them, were telegraphed for the information of an expectant public. For one who was not altogether insensible to his own merits as a professional burglar and murderer, there was a strong temptation to pose before the world. He was almost as closely watched as Louis Roman XIV, who walked, ate, slept, dressed, and Macaulay tells us even vomited majestically before a crowd of distinguished spectators. With the knowledge that everybody's eyes were upon him, he may perhaps have been a little too self-conscious, and a little too solicitous not to spoil a reputation which he evidently considered splendid. His repentance may have been perfectly sincere, and his latest statements quite truthful, but it would be obviously unwise to take all his revelations for gospel verity without sifting them thoroughly. We trust that no pains will be spared in the investigation of his latest confessions, and that if they are found consistent with known and undisputed facts, prompt reparation will be made to the man who has or may have suffered for his crimes a more terrible fate than that of one who has been convicted and punished for an offense which he has not committed on the strength of a chain of plausible circumstantial evidence. Can hardly be conceived. The lawyers are no doubt right in their dictum that circumstantial evidence is the best of all evidence, always supposing that it is strong enough. But after the recent statements of peace, the public will naturally be tempted to reopen the question of the Whalley Range murder in order to ascertain whether every link of the chain was complete, and if there is a single unsatisfied doubt, they will not remain content until the prisoner Habron receives the benefit of that doubt. The last scene of what some exuberant journalists had delighted in calling Charles Peace's life drama was thus enacted to the mild satisfaction of everybody whose hopes had not pictured a sensation of the type furnished by Mr. Merritt's New Babylon. There was the orthodox last dying speech and confession, ready to be turned into what has now become the fashionable literature of the period. There was the moribund posturizing of nice old Newgate days, and to increase the likeness to that Saturnian period, there was a crowd close at hand, whose murmurs one could hear, and which the parsons' and the patients' voices could reach. The celebrity Mrs. Thompson so coyly deprecates, and which her paramour loved with all his little heart, was worthily crowned at the end. The unkind prudishness of the prison officials refused to admit more than 4 reporters to the sickening ceremony, but those 4 were found quite sufficient to flood every newspaper in the land with funereal flimsy. The descriptions resulting from these reports were literary gems, which when he digs them up will afford the coming New Zealander a curious insight into the niceties of contemporary taste and the peculiarities of contemporary syntax. The most thorough descriptions took the convict very early indeed. In fact, it might almost be alleged that they never quite let him go. They informed us that his sleep was troubled, and his supper hearty. They dwelt on the poor wretch's feeble endeavor to emulate his betters in a silly and sickly improving of the occasion which, apparently, is achieved by an abundant use of the second person singular and frequent references to the Gospel of St. Chadbend. They hovered about his last sleep, and peered into the cups and eggshells of his last breakfast. And the occasion was one of such surpassing interest, the opportunity for distinguishing oneself in the appraisement of the criminal's linen, or the analysis of the criminal's countenance, that at least one gentleman intoxicated with his sublimity fairly forgot whether the subject of his essay was hanged or not, and used he is, and he was in the same sentences with perplexing impartiality. But that lucubration appeared in the Daily Telegraph, a journal which is happy in the possession of a class of readers who do not require good grammar to help down nasty stories, and this time the story was nasty enough to suit the palate of an epicure in topsy-turvydom. Every step, every pause on that vulgar Via Dolorosa that leads from the prison door to the scaffold was counted, criticized, described. Little scraps of the beautiful burial service were desecrated by being quoted beside the doomed man's call for drink. The demeanor and voice of the hangman, the culprit's dress, his tremors, his appetite, his letters, his speeches, the scaffold itself, with its draping of black sacking or black glazed calico authorities, differ. All this forms as pretty a page of contemporary history as confirmed Daily Telegraph writers will ever care to dwell upon. Well might the moribund hypocrite address his last whimpering to you reporters. The reporters make the celebrity of such as he was. And we may add that the journalist just mentioned not only makes the celebrity, but suggests imitation by its morbid habit of manufacturing monsters out of such sorry rascals as Charles Peace. Its epitaph on the dead sinner is, "We hanged his detestable body, because it was in the highest degree expedient to rid the world of a monster of iniquity." Common gratitude to a subject that has filled its most readable columns and suggested its most high-flown homilies for a long 3 months might have moved even the Daily Telegraph to tardy and temporary charity. It is pleasant to record that the unfortunate young Irishman Habron has received Her Majesty's pardon, and is at present in Ireland, a small yearly stipend having been settled upon him, sufficient to support him in comparative comfort for the remainder of his life. This is as it should be. A great wrong was done to the ill-fated young man, but every possible means has been taken to place him in a respectable position, for which it is understood he is duly grateful. It will be needful, before concluding, to take a cursory glance at the other characters who have figured in this strange, eventful history. None of our hero's quondam companions was more pained and mortified on discovering the depth of guilt into which he had been plunged than bandy-legged Bill, who, however, despite the overwhelming weight of evidence, stuck to his friend Charlie to the last. But after Peace's trial and conviction, Bill Rotten became an altered man. The change, we're happy to say, was for the better. Rotten reformed and became an altered character. He was never at any time what might be considered hopelessly bad. Indeed, to say the truth, he possessed many good qualities, which under different circumstances and conditions might have done much to lift him out of the slough of despondency into which he had fallen, and in which he remained for so many dark and miserable years. But Bill saw the errors of his way. Mrs. Bourne was very good to him, and strove as best she could to lead him towards the right path, and eventually succeeded. Bill Rotten is at the present time engaged as handy man in one of the traveling circus companies. No one knew better than he how to manage horses, and by diligence, adroitness, and attention, he has contrived to give general satisfaction in his new vocation. Bricket still continues the obliging host of the old carved lion, but the halo of crime with which the name of Peace has become associated is still a puzzle to old Bricket, who, when the name of our hero is mentioned, shakes his head, heaves a sigh, and says he can't make it out right. Lithe fellow must have gone off his chump or summat of the sort. Mrs. Bricket's ghost is still said to haunt the precincts of the Lion, and in addition to this apparition, 2 others are at times visible in Marshgravelane, these being the spirits of the late Mr. Philip Jamblin and of Giles Chudley. This is of course only village gossip or superstition. Nevertheless, the rustics have full faith in the truth of the report. Mr. Jackal, full of years and honors, passed away tranquilly some months before the arrest of Peace, and the radiant footman, now radiant, no longer drives a prosperous business in the greengrocery line, and is the father of 5 pledges of affection. Lord Ethelwood got himself into a host of entanglements, both monetary and amatory, and his life was none of the happiest for a very long time. One night a strange circumstance happened to his lordship, which might and indeed would have proved fatal, had it not been for a sudden and strange intervention. Lord Ethelwood had left Somerset Street, after having paid a visit to Teresa Trieste. He walked carelessly along, until he reached Grosvenor Square. While crossing the road, he was suddenly attacked by some person behind who had aimed what doubtless was intended to be a fatal blow. But the point of the knife of the wood assassin struck against the shoulder blade, and did no further mischief than inflicting a long superficial gash, which proved afterwards to be painful and troublesome, but it was not dangerous. Lord Ethelwood, young, active, and resolute, turned nimbly round upon his assailant, whom he struck several violent blows on the head and shoulders, at the same time shouting lustily for the police. In a moment or so, he was tripped up by another ruffian who was evidently in league with the others, and it was equally clear, so his lordship thought, that their intention was murder. He was not far out in his reckoning. The men who had been companions of the young mountaineer Janot had sworn to have Lionel Ethelwood's life, and for this purpose they had lain in wait for him. What the issue would have been had not timely assistance arrived, it would be impossible to say. Luckily for his lordship, a passenger on the other side of the way saw the position he was in, and at once hastened to the rescue. With one well-delivered blow he knocked down with his clenched fist one of the mountaineers. Upon the instant, the other closed with him, and a short but desperate struggle ensued, the end of which was that both combatants fell, the stranger undermost, and the mountaineer on the top. Lord Ethelwood rose to his feet, whereupon both the foreigners scampered off without further ado. Now that the struggle was over, two policemen came. Lord Ethelwood was found to be bruised and wounded, but his rescuer was in a still worse plight. He was stretched on the pavement, in a senseless condition, his head resting on the broad stone steps, which led to the vestibule of a palatial mansion. The policeman stooped down and examined the features of the stranger, from whose head a dark stream of blood was flowing. He was evidently a man slightly past the middle period of life. Lord Ethelwood was greatly concerned when he saw the lamentably prostrate condition of the gallant gentleman who had risked his own life to preserve his. The stranger was taken to the accident ward of the nearest hospital, whereupon Lord Ethelwood jumped into a cab and proceeded at once to his own residence. The family doctor attended to his wound and declared that his young patient had had a narrow escape. In a few days, however, his lordship was convalescent. Not so, however, was the ill-fated man who had come so opportunely to his rescue. He had received from the fall a fracture of the skull, and for some days he alternated between life and death. Earl Ethelwood was constant in his visits to the hospital where the patient lay, and it was on one of these occasions that a terrible and harrowing fact became manifest. He discovered that his preserver was his own father, Tom Gatliff, who the reader will remember had come upon the scene just in time to save his son. When the fact was clearly established, the Earl was almost frantic. Lady Battershaw, Lady Marvlin, and a host of other persons were in close attendance on the sufferer, who, despite skill and unremitting attention, breathed his last in the ward of a metropolitan hospital. But very little now remains to be told. Mr. Kensett, at his decease, left all his worldly wealth to him, whom we have known as Alf Parvis, who squandered his patrimony as he had heretofore squandered his ill-gotten gains, and died in poverty and wretchedness, while yet in the springtime of his life. Our story hath a mournful ending, but we trust that those who have perused these pages have yet been able to derive entertainment and instruction from the many noteworthy facts contained therein. One fact has been clearly established. A life of crime is always a life of sorrow, and care for the hearts of the guilty tremble for the past, for the present, and the future. The end.